Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Angie Houseman. Angie Houseman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father had left the family before her birth, and as a result, she never had the opportunity to know him. When Angie was 1 year old, her mother married a man named Ronald, and they had a son together. Angie got along well with her stepfather and was very close to her younger brother. Angie was a friendly and outgoing child who easily made friends with those around her. She lived with her family in a quiet suburban area of St. Louis. In 1993, at the age of 9, Angie attended the 4th grade at a local elementary school, which was just over a mile from her home. To get to school, she would take the bus from a nearby stop, and her parents felt relatively safe allowing her to travel alone due to the stop's proximity to their house. Angie usually walked to the bus stop with other neighborhood children, and after school, they would be watched over by several parents who would keep an eye on them from their windows as they made their way home. A tradition established in the neighborhood was that locals would watch over children and make sure they got home safely from the bus stop. On November 18th, Angie followed her usual routine and attended school, finishing at 3 p.m. She boarded the school bus with some neighborhood kids and got off at her stop. The other kids lived closer to the stop, so they walked ahead, leaving Angie to walk the remaining short distance home alone. However, Angie failed to arrive home, which was unusual. Her parents started to worry about half an hour later. They decided to walk along Angie's usual route from their house to the bus stop to see if they could find her. During their search, they spoke with other kids from Angie's school. They confirmed that she had gotten off the bus with them and was walking toward her home. Her parents also talked to neighbors who usually kept an eye on the kids but were busy that day and didn't see anything. Angie's parents and their friends combed the area but couldn't find her. As night began to fall, Angie's parents decided to call the police for assistance. Police officers quickly joined the search for Angie. The cold weather made it unlikely that she would have wandered off on her own, so they initially focused on the possibility of something more serious happening to her. A recent kidnapping in the neighborhood, involving an 11-year-old girl just 10 days earlier, further heightened their concerns. The man had approached the girl as she got off the school bus and tried to drag her into the bushes, but she managed to escape. Since the man was still at large, the police considered the possibility that he might be involved in Angie's disappearance. The police brought in dogs trained to track scents, and the dogs picked up Angie's scent near the bus stop. The dogs followed the scent for about half the distance to Angie's house, but then lost it. This suggested that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle at that point, which made the police think that she might have been abducted. The police also used helicopters with special sensors to search the area and looked along the banks of a small stream near Angie's home, but they did not find Angie or any of her belongings. The first day of the search for Angie yielded no results, prompting the police to reach out to the media for assistance. As a result, news of her disappearance spread rapidly throughout the city, generating over 300 calls to the police department within 24 hours. More than 20 additional officers were brought in to help handle the large number of new leads in the case. Despite this effort, none of the leads led to Angie's discovery. Detectives explored every possible scenario, and from the early stages of the investigation, they began to scrutinize Angie's stepfather. He denied any involvement in her disappearance and claimed he would never harm her. To clear his name, he agreed to a polygraph test and other checks, urging the police to focus on finding Angie rather than wasting time on him. The investigation also led to the discovery of Angie's biological father, who had never had any direct contact with his daughter. However, her mother reported that he had been seen driving past their house on multiple occasions, watching Angie play outside. Although this behavior raised suspicions among detectives, the man had a solid alibi that checked out. On the third day of Angie's disappearance, The FBI stepped in to assist the police department, which then allocated even more officers to the case. Everyone realized that something awful must have occurred to Angie, as it was unlikely she could have survived on her own in the freezing weather. A new lead emerged. Someone reported a suspicious man driving a blue sedan slowly through Angie's neighborhood. The description of this man matched the one given by a girl who had narrowly escaped an abduction attempt just 10 days before Angie vanished. The police created a composite sketch of the suspect and featured it in the news. Volunteers distributed thousands of flyers with the sketch. But the man's identity remained a mystery. As the case gained national attention, it was covered on television, attracting even more leads. The police carefully examined each new lead, but none of them led to Angie's discovery. The case also drew in psychics. They began calling Angie's home to share their alleged visions. One psychic claimed that Angie was alive and even provided a specific location where she being held, a large national park 25 miles from her home. However, the detectives did not give any credence to these claims. A reward of $10,000 was offered to anyone who could provide information about Angie's disappearance, which led to a large number of tips being submitted. During the investigation, detectives discovered a concerning detail. Angie had told her teacher a few days before she vanished that she planned to go on a nature trip with her uncle. However, Angie's parents were unaware of any uncle, and it seemed Angie had fabricated this story. This led investigators to consider the possibility that Angie might have known her abductor beforehand and referred to them as her uncle. Unfortunately, the conversation with her teacher did not provide any information about this mysterious individual. The investigation stalled, with no progress made in the following days. On November 27th, 9 days after Angie's disappearance, an important development in the case was found. A hunter contacted the police, reported that he found a body in the woods of a national park. Upon arriving at the scene, police were met with a disturbing sight. A young girl's body was tied to a tree, naked, with her head completely wrapped in tape except for her nose. Her hands were also bound with handcuffs. Near where the body was found, they found a bag containing personal items, which were quickly identified as Angie's remains. Among the belongings were notebooks with her name. After being transferred to the medical examiner, a detailed examination of the body revealed additional shocking facts. The removal of tape from her head uncovered a piece of underwear lodged in her mouth. The autopsy results indicated that Angie's death had occurred only a few hours before the body was discovered. This suggested she was held captive for 9 days, only to be left to freeze to death at the scene. Experts further determined that Angie suffered numerous injuries and had been sexually assaulted during her ordeal. Forensic analysts carefully inspected every proof collected from the crime scene and identified a fingerprint on the tape used to wrap Angie's head. They cross-referenced this evidence against potential suspects in their database, but unfortunately, this led to no new leads. The discovery of the body accelerated the police investigation, prompting the allocation of additional resources to help solve the case. The community was shocked by the extreme brutality of the crime and was deeply concerned for their children's safety, with many escorting their kids to bus stops and keeping a close watch over them at all times. A few days after Angie's discovery, concerns escalated further. On December 1st, 10-year-old Cassidy went missing from a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's home. Cassidy asked her mother for permission to visit friends who lived just a few hundred yards away, but then she disappeared. Cassidy's disappearance sparked an extensive police investigation, and detectives began to suspect the possibility that Cassidy's case might be linked to a serial killer. Although they considered the possibility that the same person was behind both abductions, they lacked concrete evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Cassidy's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bed sheets and covered with a pink curtain. The cause of death was severe head injuries. Despite efforts, detectives couldn't find any leads to the killer. Furthermore, they started questioning whether the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Cassidy's deaths. Detectives suspected they might be dealing with two different killers due to the distinct characteristics of the crimes. Around the same time, they identified a 37-year-old man named Gary as a potential suspect. Gary had previously attempted to abduct a girl just before Angie went missing and regularly traveled to St. Louis for work. The man was initially investigated for potential involvement in the murders of Angie and Cassidy, but he had an alibi for the time of their disappearances. Although he was not connected to these crimes, he did admit to assaulting 4 other girls and was subsequently sentenced to 5 years in prison. In February of the following year, a significant development in the case was revealed when detectives finally found Cassidy's body. Nearby, they found tire tracks that were identified as coming from a pickup truck model frequently used by a prominent car rental company. The distinctive vehicles were easily recognizable due to their vibrant brand logos. With this new information, detectives interviewed residents in Cassidy's neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen one of these pickup trucks. One woman reported seeing a vehicle from the car rental company near her neighbor's house about a week after Cassidy's disappearance. Police found a woman who lived with her husband and brother at the house they were investigating. When questioned, the woman claimed neither she nor her husband, brother had rented the pickup associated with the crime, and they had no involvement in the case. However, detectives were skeptical of her claims and obtained a search warrant for the house. Upon searching the house, investigators found blood traces from the victim, Cassidy, in the basement, along with the murder weapon. Further investigation revealed that the woman's brother, Thomas, was the one who had rented the pickup in question. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement but eventually confessed when confronted with the evidence. According to Thomas's confession, Cassidy had come to his door, wanting to invite his nephews out to play. He invited her into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Cassidy screamed, Thomas struck her with a heavy object and then covered her body with bed sheets. After committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, his sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement. She made it clear that she didn't want to know the details of what happened and insisted that the body be disposed of immediately. Cassidy's body remained in the basement for a week due to ongoing searches, and Thomas was too afraid to move it. Once things had calmed down, he rented a pickup truck and took the body to St. Louis. He hid her body there. Thomas was eventually sentenced to death for his crimes but died in prison several years later due to illness. Despite being questioned about Angie's case, he maintained his innocence, leading detectives to conclude that the crimes were unrelated. The investigation stalled for many months with few leads coming in. Years after Angie's murder, detectives faced another challenge when the reward for information was set to expire, sparking concerns that the public would stop providing tips and assistance in the case. However, in 2001, a local businessman donated $250,000 as a reward for information on Angie's case. This large sum of money caused a spike in many information to the police. But unfortunately, there are no clues to help solve the case. In 2001, a new development emerged in the Angie Hausman case when Corey Fox, an inmate, turned himself in and confessed to multiple murders, including the murder of Angie Hausman. Corey Fox provided detailed information about Angie's abduction and captivity, including being tied to a tree, with her underwear used as a gag. However, upon further questioning, detectives found inconsistencies in his confession, such as incorrectly stating that Angie's hands were restrained with plastic handcuffs instead of iron ones. Further investigation revealed that Corey Fox also fabricated parts of his confession, possibly due to extensive media coverage of Angie's case. Another tragic case happened in 2002, the abduction and murder of a 6-year-old girl, briefly sparked renewed interest in Angie's case. However, it was soon determined that the two cases were unrelated. The perpetrator in the 2002 case was a neighbor. He quickly confessed during interrogation, while Angie's case remained unsolved. Several years after Angie's murder, detectives reopened the case in 2007. They re-examined the documents and found a peculiar detail. A man named Roger Martin was in a parked car near the crime scene when Angie's body was discovered. When questioned, Roger claimed he was in the area for hunting, but a search of his car found no hunting gear. Further investigation revealed that Roger had a criminal record involving children, including an assault near the location where Angie's body was found. These crimes occurred before Angie's death, but the police had not thoroughly investigated Roger at the time. The new detective team called Roger in for questioning. He denied any involvement in Angie's murder, claiming he was in the area by chance. Roger stated that he was still at work when Angie's body was left at the crime scene. The investigation stalled after a 9-hour interrogation of Roger failed to yield results. Although his fingerprints were taken and compared to those on the tape from Angie's head, no match was found, leading to his release due to insufficient evidence. The case remained stagnant until 2018 when the St. Louis Police Department established a dedicated task force to re-examine the evidence using advanced technology. The team focused on 3 crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and the underwear used to silence her. Despite previous failed attempts to find the perpetrator's DNA on these items, the detectives were determined to try again. They began by re-examining the handcuffs but encountered difficulties due to the presence of Angie's blood. They then turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head but discovered it had deteriorated over time, meaningless their efforts. The investigators examined the underwear as a last resort, despite low expectations due to it being in Angie's mouth for several hours, which could have erased any foreign DNA. Using advanced technology, they thoroughly inspected every inch of the underwear and eventually found a tiny sample of unfamiliar DNA, sufficient for analysis. The DNA was confirmed to belong to a male and was immediately uploaded to the FBI database. In cases like this, it's common for the DNA not to match anyone in the database, requiring further efforts to identify the person. However, in this instance, the detectives got lucky. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been in prison since 2003. Cox was not on police radar in connection with Angie's case, but he had a significant criminal record. His first stint in prison was in 1982, during his military service in Germany, where he worked as a part-time babysitter. However, his babysitting job ended when 4 girls accused him of sexual assault. Cox initially received an 8-year prison sentence in the United States but was released after serving only 3 years. Following his release, he relocated to St. Louis. However, his freedom was short-lived as he was arrested again 4 years later when 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexual assault. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but he violated his parole, resulting in an additional year in prison. After his release in 1992, Cox moved to St. Louis to live with his relatives. The following year, he allegedly abducted and murdered Angie. In 2002, Cox was arrested again, this time for operating a major online platform where users shared child abuse materials. The FBI had been investigating the platform and caught Cox in a sting operation when he attempted to meet an undercover agent posing as a 14-year-old girl. Cox had planned to make the girl his slave and had sent her money for a bus ticket. However, when he arrived at the meeting place, he was met by armed FBI agents and arrested. A search of his computer revealed over 45,000 images of child abuse, as well as evidence that he was the mastermind behind the online platform. This led to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site, marking one of the largest operations against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Cox was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his term ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep him detained, citing him as a serious threat to children. He remained in prison until 2019, when his DNA sample matched the DNA sample from Angie's case. Detectives visited Cox in prison to discuss the match, but he denied any involvement and requested a lawyer. Given the strong DNA evidence against him, the police knew Cox's chances of winning in court were slim. Instead of pursuing a trial, investigators contacted Earl's lawyer with a proposal. In exchange for Cox's confession to Angie's murder, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and seek a life sentence instead. Aware of the strong evidence against him, Cox agreed to the deal. Detectives returned to the prison to hear Cox's account of the events. Although some parts of his story seemed unlikely, the crucial aspect for investigators was his admission to the murder. Cox claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving near his mother's and sister's neighborhood when his car broke down in the middle of the road. When he tried to examine the car, a school bus stopped, and several children got off. The children went into their homes, except for one girl, Angie. According to Cox, Angie approached him, and they briefly talked. He noticed she was cold, so he offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Cox then took Angie to Burger King to eat and later brought her to his home, where he claimed to have sexually assaulted her over several days. Eventually, Cox decided to get rid of Angie, taking her to the location where her body would later be found. He tied her to a tree, claiming she was still alive at that moment. Detectives were skeptical about certain parts of Cox's story. Angie was unlikely to get into a car with a stranger, given the short distance to her home. The investigators also questioned the car breakdown in Cox's story. He claimed the car stalled, but it started again when Angie approached. It's more likely that the perpetrator targeted Angie and decided to abduct her. This hypothesis seems more plausible than Cox's account. The detectives got what they needed, a confession to the murder. In August 2020, Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole. A judge handed down the sentence. Unfortunately, Angie's mother didn't live to see justice served. She died of cancer in 2016. Angie's father, Ronald, told reporters that Cox was responsible for his wife's death and should have been tried for 2 murders. A woman's life was forever changed after the loss of her daughter. She lost all interest in life and eventually passed away. Cox's story, however, took a different turn. The prosecutor reopened a case involving the sexual abuse of 2 7-year-old girls, for which Cox had previously received a lenient sentence of 1 year in prison for violating his parole. The police reached out to one of Cox's victims, now an adult, and asked her to testify against him. Cox ultimately admitted to his crimes and was given an additional 10 years prison sentence. In court, his victim spoke out, saying that despite Cox's terrible actions, but she would go on to live a happy and fulfilling life, while Cox would spend the rest of his life in prison. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Lisa Valdez. Lisa Valdez was born on September 6, 1961, in San Francisco, California. She grew up with her mother and brother. Lisa and her mother had an exceptionally close relationship, rarely arguing. As a teenager, Lisa developed a passion for dance and an interest in modern technology. She was an early adopter of emerging technologies, including email, which was still a novelty at the time. This interest in technology would later shape her career path. After graduating from college, Lisa found a job as a software analyst in San Francisco. Her mother then used her savings to buy Lisa an apartment in a desirable neighborhood. Lisa lived alone in the apartment, progressing her career and spending time with her family whenever possible. She also continued to pursue her passion for dance. On May 16, 1998, Lisa, then 36, hosted her mother and some family friends at her apartment for the evening. After the guests departed, her mother helped with the dishes before heading home. Before leaving, Lisa promised to call her mother the next day, but the call never came. Initially, her mother assumed Lisa was simply busy. Since Lisa had dance practice scheduled for the next day, her mother decided to wait. However, the entire day passed without any word from Lisa. After trying unsuccessfully to contact Lisa for several days, Lisa's mother began to worry. When Lisa did not show up for work on Monday, her co-workers called her mother to express their concern. The mother immediately decided to go to Lisa's apartment complex. When Lisa's mother arrived at her home, she saw a group of police officers. Lisa's mother approached the police to ask what was going on and was told that residents had reported a strange smell coming from one of the apartments. The apartment manager investigated, found the door unlocked, and called the police after discovering a body on the floor. Police quickly identified the victim as Lisa. Her body showed signs of trauma, making it clear she had been murdered. The advanced state of decomposition suggested that Lisa had been dead for several days. The police suspected that Lisa had been assaulted due to the presence of her underwear next to her body. The crime scene was marked by extensive blood stains on the floor and bed, with the TV and air conditioner still on. However, the disarray of the apartment was later found to be consistent with Lisa's usual living habits. There was no indication of a robbery, as all of Lisa's valuables, including jewelry, were left untouched. The only missing items were her keys and a gym bag. A peculiar detail was the discovery that the attacker had cut off some of Lisa's hair and taken it with them. Detectives believed that the killer may have known Lisa personally. This theory was supported by the lack of forced entry into the apartment complex, which was secured by a fence and required a key or resident approval for access. Police investigating Lisa's murder began by interviewing her neighbors. Their first lead came when a neighbor mentioned discovering a bent metal door frame and faint blood stains on her door 2 days before Lisa's body was discovered. The neighbor had previously reported the incident to the building's management, but they had not notified the police. Police are certain that Lisa's murder was linked to a break-in at her neighbor's apartment. It is possible that the person trying to break into her neighbor's apartment was seen by Lisa and killed her, but another theory is that the break-in may have occurred after Lisa was murdered. Police also interviewed the person who cleaned Lisa's apartment weekly. She said that 2 days before Lisa's body was found, she tried to open the apartment door with her key but found it locked from the inside. When she looked through the door, she saw a naked woman lying on the floor and a male voice talking. Assuming it was a private situation, the cleaner quickly left without doing anything. Police suspected Lisa was dead when the cleaner heard a man's voice. And it was her killer, who was still in the apartment. The cleaner also reported seeing a black Ziploc bag near the body. An envelope containing cash was found taped to the inside of Lisa's apartment door. The money was for the cleaner, as Lisa always left it with her the day before cleaning. The presence of the envelope suggests that Lisa was likely attacked after her mother left, sometime between midnight and early morning. Neighbors who lived downstairs reported hearing a loud noise coming from upstairs on the night of the attack, followed by someone coming down the stairs. Although they did not see who it was, the neighbors' accounts provided a timeline of events. Police continued to search Lisa's apartment for clues while medical professionals examined her body. Forensic analysis revealed that a fingerprint on the toilet seat did not belong to Lisa. In an attempt to identify the fingerprint, the police collected fingerprints from all of Lisa's friends and family members, but none of them matched the mystery fingerprint. Detectives therefore suspected that the mystery fingerprint might belong to Lisa's killer. Medical examiners released their report, shedding new light on the case. Lisa's body showed more than 20 stab wounds, but the advanced decomposition made it difficult to determine if she had been sexually assaulted. The medical team also discovered skin particles under Lisa's nails, which were likely to have come from her attacker, and sent them to the lab for analysis. One of the pillowcases showed multiple blood stains, which upon analysis were found to be a mixture of Lisa's blood and another person's. The police sent the blood stains to the laboratory for further testing. Police believe the killer may have accidentally injured himself when stabbing Lisa. At the scene, they discovered 2 bandages from a first aid kit in the toilet, which the killer may have used to bandage his wound. Additionally, the killer may have left fingerprints on the toilet seat when discarding the bandages. DNA analysis revealed that the blood on the pillowcase belonged to a man whose DNA was not in the FBI database. Furthermore, the skin particles found under Lisa's fingernails and the blood on her knee were from the same person. Although the DNA did not match anyone in the database, detectives now had a DNA profile of the killer. The police compared the DNA evidence with samples from criminals in the area. They also began to scrutinize Lisa's acquaintances. Lisa's mother mentioned that Lisa had met a man named Albert Ketto, and that they had planned to go on a date the day after the murder. However, Albert Ketto had canceled their plans just days before. Police brought Albert Ketto in for questioning and noticed a large cut on his hand. Police considered Albert Ketto a potential suspect. However, Albert Ketto denied any involvement in the crime. Police collected Albert Ketto's fingerprints and DNA samples for further analysis. However, the test results showed that none of Albert Ketto's samples matched the blood found on the pillowcase. Additionally, the skin particles under Lisa's fingernails belonged to someone else. This new information led investigators to expand their search for other suspects. Police decided to look at messages left on Lisa's answering machine in the days before she was killed. Police compiled a list of 40 callers but discovered one unusual message. It came from a man who had called Lisa just hours before the murder. He left a message saying, "You know how it goes. Hey Lisa, are you home?" When police played the message to Lisa's friend, the friend recognized the voice as Albert Robinson, a co-worker of Lisa's. Lisa and Albert Robinson worked together. However, Albert Robinson had expressed romantic feelings for Lisa, but she did not return his feelings. Albert Robinson appeared at Lisa's memorial service a few days after the murder. Albert Robinson claimed that he and Lisa were in love, saying that they planned to get married and start a family. However, Lisa's friends and mother objected to this. Lisa told them that she had no feelings for Albert Robinson and that the relationship between the two was just friends. During questioning, Albert Robinson denied any involvement in Lisa's murder, claiming that he loved Lisa and would never hurt her. However, he refused to provide DNA and fingerprint samples to the police, which aroused suspicion and made him the prime suspect. Police obtained a search warrant for Albert Robinson's home, where they discovered something unusual. Albert Robinson's home contained many photos of Lisa. However, despite the evidence, he continued to deny his involvement. He cooperated by providing his fingerprints and DNA samples to the police. However, they were surprised when Albert Robinson's test results did not match the samples collected at Lisa's apartment. Police eliminated Albert Robinson as a suspect. Due to lack of evidence, the case remained unsolved for many years. The investigation continues, with police waiting for the suspect's DNA or fingerprints to be matched in a database. Over the years, Lisa's mother has used social media platforms to plead for information. But the police have yet to uncover any new clues, leaving the case even more unsolved. In 2010, the FBI used new DNA technology to identify suspects by matching their DNA to relatives in a database. This method was limited to close relatives. On September 2nd, police received a call from the FBI with the news. Although the FBI did not compare the DNA to possible relatives in the database, they did retest the original DNA sample as part of the process. Amazingly, 13 years after the murder, the retested DNA sample was a perfect match. DNA from blood and skin particles found under Lisa's fingernails matched a 52-year-old man named Anthony Hughes, whose DNA had recently been added to the FBI database. Although Anthony had a lengthy criminal record, his DNA was not in the database because he had committed a minor crime. However, a change in California law requires DNA samples from all convicted felons, regardless of the severity of their crimes. As a result, Anthony's DNA was collected after he was arrested for petty theft. The investigation revealed that Anthony's fingerprints were also on file and matched those found on the toilet seat in Lisa's apartment. Experts were able to identify the specific finger that left the fingerprint. Prior to the arrest, police searched for additional evidence that linked Anthony to the crime. 13 years ago, police reviewed calls to Lisa's phone before she was killed, but they ignored calls made after her death. Recently, police discovered a call made by Anthony to Lisa's phone just one day after her death. He left a message, the content of which seemed normal and did not arouse any suspicion at the time. If the police had investigated Anthony at that time, they would have found his extensive criminal record. When they went through Lisa's belongings, detectives found Anthony's phone number in her address book, indicating that she knew him. After talking to Lisa's friends, the police learned that Lisa had dated Anthony in high school. The police now had all the information they needed to question Anthony. Since Anthony was homeless at the time and had no fixed address, the police approached cautiously to avoid Anthony fleeing. They arrested him under the pretext of investigating a series of robberies in San Francisco, and he surrendered without resistance. Police began asking about a series of robberies, gradually bringing up Anthony's previous convictions. Eventually, police asked him if he knew a woman named Lisa Valdez. He initially denied knowing her, but when shown a photo, he admitted that they had been high school acquaintances. Anthony also claimed that he had not seen Lisa since the late 1980s. The police pressed Anthony for information about his relationship with Lisa. Eventually, the police produced evidence of his DNA found in Lisa's apartment in 1998. Upon hearing this, Anthony burst into tears. Anthony was restrained as he cried and screamed. He was eventually charged with murder, and detectives informed Lisa's family that her killer had been arrested. However, the trial did not begin until 4 years later. During the trial, Anthony initially appeared confident, but as the trial progressed, his pace changed. He began appearing in court with a Bible and wearing a cross. Anthony's lawyer argued that his client was incapable of committing the murder due to a medical condition that weakened his muscles, making movement extremely difficult. Despite the defense's argument, the prosecution presented strong evidence linking Anthony to the crime scene. This included his skin cells found under the Lisa's fingernails, his blood on a pillowcase, and his fingerprint on the toilet seat. Anthony maintained his innocence, claiming he had not seen the Lisa since the late 1980s. The prosecution, on the other hand, proposed a different scenario. They believed Anthony had contacted the Lisa, visited her home, and attempted to engage in intimate relations with her. When she refused, he became enraged and killed her. As part of the crime, he cut off a portion of her hair and took it with him before fleeing the scene. Ultimately, the jury delivered a unanimous verdict, finding Anthony guilty of first-degree murder. However, the prosecution faced challenges in securing a conviction for sexual assault due to the advanced state of the Lisa's decomposition, which made it difficult to gather sufficient evidence. The charges were reduced from first-degree murder to second-degree murder, which carries a lighter sentence. Anthony was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Anthony has been in prison since then and continues to maintain his innocence. Anthony will be eligible for parole in 2031 at age 72. However, Anthony's chances of being paroled are slim, as parole boards typically view refusal to plead guilty as a lack of remorse. Hi there, Investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case, the case of Austin Harrouff. Austin Malcolm Harrouff, known by the nickname Golden Boy, was born on December 21, 1996, in Palm Beach, Florida. He was the eldest of 2 children and was born into a wealthy and respected medical family. His father was a successful dentist with many private clinics, and his mother was a leading pharmaceutical expert. The Harrouff family lived in a spacious, luxurious house by the sea. When Austin was 1.5 years old, his younger sister Haley was born, and the 2 siblings quickly became close. Austin's parents ensured that he and his younger sister received a good education and encouraged personal growth and creative pursuits. Austin excelled at school and had many interests outside of studying. He was passionate about playing guitar, wrestling, football, and acting in an amateur theater group. He saw himself as a creative and ambitious person. Along with his parents and sister, Austin traveled extensively, discovering new places during their vacations. Austin described himself as a cheerful and optimistic person with a strong imagination who excelled in academics and sports through perseverance. However, Austin also admitted that he was very shy, which sometimes made it difficult for him to communicate with his peers. Austin's personal life was interrupted at the age of 13 when his parents decided to divorce. His father moved out of the family home and into a new home with his new partner, eventually marrying her. Meanwhile, Austin remained with his mother, who also found a new partner and married him within a year. Despite facing the emotional challenges of his parents' divorce, Austin continued to excel academically and athletically. Austin always dreamed of becoming a doctor, like his parents, to help others. He was a high-achieving student and was admired by many of his friends. Austin's physical transformation during his youth was remarkable. He grew to be 6 feet 2 inches tall, developed outstanding muscles, and became strong. Austin's charismatic smile and gentle demeanor gave him an almost angelic appearance. However, he still struggled with social anxiety and shyness, which limited his ability to form relationships. In his personal diary, Austin wrote candidly about feeling isolated at school. His classmates called him a nerd and made fun of him, leaving Austin with few friends. Despite these difficulties, he still held out hope that his life would improve once he entered college. Austin looked forward to starting over, forging new relationships, and gaining independence from his parents. The important turning point came when Austin received news that he had been accepted into the University of Florida's prestigious 4-year medical program. This achievement promised to open the door to a successful and rewarding medical career, with the opportunity to continue his studies at any of the top medical schools in the country. Overjoyed by this news, Austin felt like his dream was finally within reach. As he prepared to enter this new chapter, his parents drove him to the college campus in late August. With excitement mixed with trepidation, Austin began his journey to becoming an independent adult, documenting his experiences in his first vlog. During his freshman year, Austin became deeply interested in bodybuilding and spent a significant amount of time in the gym, achieving notable results. He had developed strong muscles, but his success was partly due to steroid use. Austin had openly discussed steroid use in a YouTube vlog he had started in the spring of 2016. Austin had posted various videos to his channel, including discussions about sports and fitness, musical performances with his guitar, and philosophical musings on life. However, over time, his posts became increasingly disturbing. Austin began warning his followers about the dangers of steroids, claiming that they could cause serious mental health consequences and drive a person crazy. Austin had 2 distinct physical states, a normal state and a state he called crazy. Austin found it difficult to understand these contrasting aspects of himself. Austin had created videos where he spoke in different voices, as if he were other people. Sometimes, Austin's voice changed and he burst into tears for no apparent reason. Experts then reviewed Austin's posts and concluded that Austin was desperately seeking help in each post. As Austin struggled to connect with others during his studies, his blog had become his primary means of expressing himself. Over time, videos recorded him gradually becoming insane. His behavior became increasingly erratic, provocative, and aggressive. Some subscribers suspected he was using banned substances while recording, and they asked him about it in the comment section. Austin denied this, saying it was unhealthy and that he would never use banned substances. However, his behavior showed otherwise. One subscriber even speculated that Austin might have dissociative identity disorder. The sudden changes in Austin were not only manifested in behavior but also in appearance. When he returned home for summer vacation, his mother and sister were shocked by the changes they witnessed. During his year-long separation, Austin had experienced significant physical changes, including significant muscle gain, but these changes were more than superficial. Austin's behavior became increasingly strange. He would say nonsense and claim he didn't need sleep. At first, his family did not take this seriously, but as night fell, they realized he was serious. Austin declared that he would guard the house and protect his family from unknown threats, and he kept his promise, wandering the hallways until morning. Every hour, he loudly checked on his mother and sister, reassuring them that they could sleep peacefully because he was guarding them. The next morning, his mother made him talk seriously and asked him if he had used drugs. Austin admitted that he had tried many different stimulants over the past year and described their effects on him. He even used a powerful synthetic drug that caused hallucinations, rage, and could be fatal if overdosed. However, he promised his mother that he had stopped using and was no longer in danger. Despite her concerns, Austin's mother did not seek help from professionals. As a pharmacist, she thought she could help her son herself. She gave him sedatives and sleeping pills to help him relax and sleep after a long, restless night. However, Austin only slept for a few hours before resuming his vigil, informing his family every hour that everything was quiet and under control. Over several weeks, Austin's behavior continued to deteriorate, but his mother refused to seek professional help from psychiatrists and did not even inform his father about the situation. On the morning of August 13th, Austin unexpectedly visited an old classmate who lived nearby. The classmate was stunned because they hadn't seen each other in over a year and Austin hadn't contacted her. When she asked why he came, Austin explained that he had forgotten the year of his birth and was looking for answers. The confused classmate replied that it was 1996, after which Austin abruptly turned around and left without saying anything. Austin's behavior scared and puzzled the girl, so she immediately called Austin's mother and told her everything, asking if the boy might be using drugs. This prompted the woman to call her ex-husband, who was working in another state, and express her concern that something was seriously wrong with their son. Austin's father flew to Florida the next day and, after speaking with his son, suggested he voluntarily check into a clinic for a medical examination, which Austin firmly refused. Austin's father then had a heartfelt conversation with his ex-wife, and together they decided to send Austin for a mandatory examination and subsequent treatment at a drug rehabilitation or psychiatric facility. However, they couldn't do it in time. A troubling revelation followed. The next day, Austin's friends invited him to join them at the beach because of the hot and sunny weather. His mother insisted that Haley accompany him to keep an eye on her brother. Austin was excited about the outing but dressed as if he were going to the mountains instead of the beach. He wore a thick athletic hoodie, long pants, boots, and ski goggles. When his friends saw him, they were silent at first, then burst into laughter. They teased him about his outfit and asked if he was okay. Austin became angry and shouted that if they thought he was crazy, he would prove it by threatening their lives. Austin's friend didn't take him seriously but stepped back just in case. Haley noticed Austin was on the edge of a breakdown and decided to talk to him to calm him down. In a private conversation, Austin confided to Harley that he believed he was half wild animal, immortal, and had superhuman strength. This frightened her, but she stayed calm to avoid provoking him. At the beach, Austin behaved normally. He joked, laughed, played volleyball, and had fun with his friends. As evening came, they all said goodbye and went their separate ways. Austin and Haley walked to a small restaurant near the coast to meet their father and his current wife. On the way, Austin told Haley he wanted to test his immortality by crossing a busy highway directly through the fast-moving traffic. When Haley realized what was happening, she chased after Austin and physically pulled him away, urging him to hurry because they were expected. Austin agreed that they shouldn't keep anyone waiting and quietly followed his sister. During dinner, Austin acted strangely again, getting up from the table several times to go outside, looking around as if he was afraid of someone, then returning. He then decided to tell his father and stepmother about his belief in his immortality. When his father calmly suggested seeking professional help, Austin leaped up, shouted that he wasn't insane, pushed his father forcefully, and ran out of the restaurant. After leaving the restaurant, Austin walked several miles and eventually wandered into a neighborhood he didn't recognize. There, an open garage with bright lights caught his attention, and he headed towards it. This home belonged to an elderly couple, 59-year-old John Stevens and 56-year-old Michelle Mishkin Stevens. In the evenings, they loved barbecuing and watching movies in their spacious garage, which they had set up like a living room. Married for over 25 years, they had 3 adult children who lived independently, allowing them to enjoy retirement and each other's company. That evening, John took their dog for a walk while Michelle prepared for their usual movie night. When Michelle noticed an unfamiliar young man on their lawn, she felt no threat and even asked if he needed help. However, the situation unexpectedly took a turn. Jeffrey Pfizer, the Stevens family neighbor who lived across the street, was on friendly terms with them. Around 9 p.m., he heard suspicious noises outside. When he looked into the yard, he suddenly heard Michelle's agonizing scream. Without hesitation, he rushed to help his neighbors and saw Austin near the garage. Jeffrey tried to pull Austin away, but Austin was overpoweringly strong and knocked Jeffrey to the ground. As Jeffrey tried to recover, Austin stabbed him several times in the back and shoulder. Realizing he was overpowered and needed help, Jeffrey ran into the Stevens family house to draw Austin's attention away from himself. After exiting through the back door, Jeffrey headed to his own home. Once inside, Jeffrey realized Austin had not followed him but had returned to attack Michelle. Jeffrey immediately called the police and emergency medical services, reporting an armed attack by a stranger with a knife and stating that both he and his elderly neighbor had been injured. After contacting emergency services, Jeffrey fell silent, listening closely. He eventually realized no one was outside his door. It seemed Austin had remained at Stevens family's house, and now strange animal-like noises, resembling the growls of a wild beast, could be heard along with screams of terror and moans. It took the police about 10 minutes to arrive. But by then, it was tragically too late. The sight that awaited them was horrifying. 2 officers approached the garage with weapons drawn, only to be halted in shock at the doorway. There, in a pool of blood, lay the lifeless body of Michelle Stevens. The autopsy later revealed she had suffered multiple blunt force traumas to the head and a stab wound to the chest. A bit further inside, in the dim light, 2 more individuals were on the ground. John was reaching out, pleading for help with a strained voice. Above him, Austin was seemingly choking him. The officers demanded that Austin release the victim, threatening him with their guns. However, Austin showed no response, and firing was too risky due to the possibility of hitting both people. Instead, one officer drew a taser and warned Austin. Only then did he see that Austin was not just assaulting but actually biting John's face, holding his head and neck firmly. Beneath John spread a vast pool of blood, with a chunk of flesh missing from his left cheek. And his lip, nose, and ear were also mutilated and seemingly chewed off. John was immobilized, barely able to move, silently pleading for help. The officers shocked the attacker with the taser, but he seemed unaffected, continuing to tear at John's face with his teeth. A kick to Austin's face only made him growl loudly and bite into Stevens's cheek again. Reinforcements arrived, including a police dog that was unleashed on the frenzied young man. The dog latched onto Austin's arm, but he seemed to feel no pain, breaking free and injuring himself further. A powerful kick from an officer finally disoriented Austin long enough to handcuff him. At this moment, Austin claimed he felt unwell, possibly having eaten something bad, before losing consciousness and convulsing. Emergency medical teams transported 4 individuals from the scene. Unfortunately, Michelle could not survive, and her husband John passed away on the way to the hospital due to severe blood loss from stab wounds and the trauma from the attack. Jeffrey, who reported the incident, survived, but he experienced permanent minor motor skill impairment in his right hand due to nerve and tendon damage. Austin fell into a coma after mistakenly ingesting a substance from a garage bottle, thinking it was alcohol, which turned out to be a chemical. He suffered severe burns to his esophagus and stomach and spent several days in critical condition, but medical professionals ultimately saved him. Austin, the attacker, spent nearly 2 weeks in a coma. Upon regaining consciousness, he claimed to remember nothing about the events of that day. Gradually, he began to recall having dinner at a restaurant and an argument with his father, after which he walked away. Austin described seeing a ghostly figure that guided him through dark alleys and unfamiliar neighborhoods until he saw a light in the distance. The light came from a lantern near Stephen family's garage, where John was preparing a barbecue and setting out food. When Michelle saw him, she was startled and called for help. Austin admitted to hitting her several times and then pulled out a knife, claiming he would rid her of evil. At that moment, a neighbor named Jeffrey Fisher intervened, but Austin, thinking Jeffrey was a demon, attacked him with the knife. After Jeffrey ran to get help, Austin continued to assault the woman until she was lifeless. He then noticed a bottle, mistook it for alcohol, and drank about half of it. Soon after, he heard a dog barking and a man's voice. Austin claimed he couldn't remember what happened next, according to his own statements. Initially, there was speculation that Austin was under the influence of strong drugs, which could explain his aggression and lack of sensitivity to pain. However, hospital tests showed no traces of drugs, medication, or alcohol in his blood. This led to the conclusion that Austin might have experienced a psychotic break, acting without awareness of his actions. Experienced psychiatrists were tasked with determining the truth of this claim. The case of Austin Harrouf attracted significant media attention due to its extreme brutality and ambiguity, both in the courtroom and psychiatric care. The children of the murdered couple, along with the relatives of the injured neighbor, believed that the young man was pretending to be insane and claiming memory loss to be declared incompetent and avoid harsh punishment. Most people following the case shared this belief. The state-appointed psychological and psychiatric expert, Dr. Landrum, reported that Austin's mental illness led to an acute psychotic episode, resulting in the deaths of Michelle and John. However, the prosecutor argued in court that he did not believe the defendant met the legal definition of insanity at the time of the crime. It was suggested that Austin's mental health had worsened due to experimenting with various drugs, using steroids, and having trouble socializing with peers since school. However, at the time of the crime, he was not under the influence of any illegal substances or alcohol, as none were found in his blood, indicating that the reasons for his violent behavior were another reason. During a court hearing, Austin's father disclosed that their family has a history of schizophrenia, and he worried that his son might have inherited this serious illness. Additionally, Austin was suspected of having clinical lycanthropy delusion, a rare disorder. This might explain why he acted like a wild animal and seemed immune to pain, although no psychiatrist confirmed this diagnosis. After receiving treatment, Austin was moved to jail, but the case remains unresolved. He is still awaiting trial, and his lawyers argue that he is mentally ill. Meanwhile, the relatives of John and Michelle and Jeffrey have expressed hopes in interviews that Austin will be deemed competent and sentenced to death for his terrible actions. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio, one of 6 children in a large family. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise and chaos of the city. In the summer of 1975, 14-year-old Christy spent most of her days socializing with friends and family, often going to the local neighborhood swimming pool. In late August, Christy babysat for a family friend on the evening of August 22nd. The next day, August 23rd, she woke up around noon and decided to go swimming to cool off. She invited her sister Kim to join her, and they went to the residential area. While Kim went swimming, Christy relaxed on a deck chair. A short time later, Kim went ashore and found Christy nowhere to be seen, but Kim decided not to look for her and instead stayed at the pool. Surprisingly, when Kim returned home, Christy was not there. Hours passed and Christy still hadn't come home. Kim became even more worried. She decided to look for Christy and ran into a neighbor who told her that the police had found the body of a young woman a few miles away, but they had not been able to identify it. Kim rushed home to tell her parents, who immediately called the police to report Christy missing. It was very likely that the body found belonged to Christy, so the police directed them to the morgue for identification. Although it was difficult to recognize the identity of the body due to the severely bruised face, Christy's mother eventually accepted that the body was Christy's, her beloved daughter, thanks to the birthmark on her leg. Police later explained to the family what had happened. It turned out that at about 2:30 p.m. that same day, a man reported finding a body in the woods behind the local shopping center. He, his wife, and son had gone there to buy toys, but before entering the store, their son wanted to take a walk on the trail behind the building. This path was a popular walking path leading to a river, and the area was famous for its beauty. Together with his parents, the son went for a walk on this trail. During their hike, they came across a disturbing scene about 10 yards down the trail. A man was kneeling on top of someone and repeatedly beating him with a wooden object. When he saw the family, he immediately ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a seriously injured little girl covered in blood. His wife, who had medical training, checked the victim's pulse, but there was none. The father quickly went to a nearby shopping center and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided investigators with a detailed description of the suspect, who was a tall, slim young man with long black hair, wearing jean shorts and boots, about 20 years old. Police created a sketch of the suspect based on their description and distributed it to patrol officers. However, the investigation of the crime scene yielded no results. The wooden object used as the murder weapon was found, but they discovered no other evidence linking the perpetrator. Notably, the victim's hands were tied with a telephone cord and her bikini top was pulled down. Her t-shirt and shoes were found next to her body. Despite these signs, forensic experts found no evidence that a sexual assault had occurred. Luckily, detectives were able to continue their investigation thanks to new information from Kim, who told them about a conversation between Christy and a friend, Carol. The police summoned Carol. Carol recounted to police a suspicious phone call she had received from a stranger claiming to be a local DJ. The man had called her to talk about a fake cheerleading competition at the state fair, which was supposedly being held behind the local shopping mall. He announced the event would start at 1:45 p.m. and had told Carol to wait for someone at the entrance to the forest trail. The police were skeptical about Carol's story, and when they dug deeper, they discovered many inconsistencies. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister, but they had run into Christy and her sister on the way. Carol then invited Christy to join her, and they left their sisters behind to go to the mall. However, when they arrived at the entrance to the woods, no one appeared, and Carol claimed that she had gone to the shopping center to ask for the time. When she turned around, Christy was gone. The police investigation revealed that there had been no cheerleading competitions in town, casting doubt on the reason for Carol and Christy's trip to the woods. Police suspected that the mysterious phone call might have been a ruse to lure Carol into the woods, but they were unable to trace the call to identify the caller. Further investigation revealed discrepancies in Carol's story. She claimed to have met Christy and her sister on the street, but Kim said they had been at the pool and Carol had come to meet them there. Additionally, Christy's mother reported a strange conversation with Carol later that evening, which raised further suspicions. Carol apologized to Christy's mother and revealed that she had been the intended target of a murder involving two people. However, she quickly retracted her words and left. Christy's mother reported this to the police. The police questioned Carol again, but she denied making a statement and stuck to her original story. Carol was then given a polygraph test, which did not reveal any signs of deception when Carol answered key questions. As a result, investigators shifted focus away from Carol and pursued other leads. Police intensified their search for the killer 3 days after Christy's murder. A police officer patrolling the streets of Columbus spotted a man who bore a striking resemblance to a sketch of Christy's killer. Patrol officers quickly called detectives to the scene and asked Jack to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, Jack Carmen, 25, agreed to go with them. However, the police soon realized that Jack was severely mentally disabled, with an IQ of about 50 points. Results based on many different tests. As a result, Jack had limited communication skills and could not read or write. He was cared for by a specialist medical facility and lived in a supervised apartment. Despite these challenges, detectives could not ignore the striking resemblance between Jack and the composite sketch of the suspect in Christy's case. The interrogation process was extremely difficult due to Jack's limited ability to understand and answer questions. Most of the time, he just answered with one word or stayed silent. The detectives began to question whether Jack was capable of fully understanding their questions. To improve the situation, they had to ask very simple and specific questions. After 6 hours of questioning, detectives were finally starting to get results. They were finally able to extract a confession from Jack. According to his testimony, on the day in question he had left his apartment, taken the bus to the shopping center and bought a shirt and pants. As Jack walked through the parking lot, he saw Christy sitting on a fence near the entrance to a wooded trail. He approached her, tied her up by tying her hands, and then dragged her into the woods where he carried out the assault. After the attack, Christy tried to run away, but Jack quickly caught up with her. He picked up a nearby piece of wood and repeatedly hit her in the head. Jack then ran to the main road in front of the shopping center and boarded the bus. The next day, police took Jack to the forest where he allegedly committed the crime. There, he pointed out the exact spot and provided specific details that only the perpetrator would know, including the fact that the piece of wood used to strike the victim broke in half. Investigators also verified the testimony, asking the couple who found Christy to identify the person they had seen on the day of the incident. Both identified the man they had seen as Jack. As a result, Jack was charged with multiple offenses, including assault and murder. The prosecution chose to include it in the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty, but Jack's lawyer negotiated a deal. In exchange for a life sentence, Jack would plead guilty before the judge, thereby avoiding execution. The case moved swiftly, with thousands of people following. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack was sentenced to life in prison. However, after the trial, public opinion began to shift, and many people started to question Jack's guilt. As more details about his confession and his background emerged in the media, people began to wonder whether he was truly capable of committing such a heinous crime. Those who knew Jack found it hard to believe that he was capable of the crime. He was a passive, timid, and compliant person who would agree to anything if pushed hard enough. In the past, he had even taken the blame for something he didn't do, like the time he claimed responsibility for breaking a boiler at a charity center, when in fact someone else was to blame. This behavior raised doubts about his ability to make a genuine confession to the crime. His supporters felt that the police must have manipulated him into confessing by feeding him information and asking pressured questions. For instance, if the police asked him if he hit the victim with a piece of wood, and he answered yes, they could use that as a confession. However, this approach can be unreliable, especially considering Jack's tendency to confess to anything when under threat. Even the mention of the electric chair was enough to make him agree to whatever the detectives wanted. Furthermore, the police took Jack to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, a married couple who later identified him at the police station. This raised concerns that the witnesses had been biased, as they had already seen Jack and knew he was a suspect, despite the police's claims that they never crossed paths. There were several red flags surrounding Jack's alleged involvement in the crime. For instance, the police failed to locate the bus driver or any passengers who claimed to have seen Jack on his way to the city center, which contradicted his own statement. Moreover, multiple people at the charity organization building where Jack lived and worked said to have seen him at around 1:30 p.m. This created a major timing issue. Even if Jack had left immediately after being seen by these witnesses, the bus ride to the shopping center on the outskirts of town would have taken at least 40 minutes. Given the crime was committed at 1:50 p.m., it was logistically impossible for Jack to have made it on time. This cast serious doubts about Jack's guilt and raised suspicions that the police may have coerced his confession. Christie's parents, too, began questioning whether Jack was the true culprit. At the height of the controversy, approximately 70 individuals gathered in front of City Hall on September 9th to draw attention to the case and advocate for a comprehensive investigation. They established a public committee aimed at securing justice for Jack. As a result, Jack was assigned a new lawyer, who swiftly petitioned for a case review. After several months, a judge dismissed Jack's original confession and ordered a new trial, putting the onus on the prosecution to establish his guilt from the beginning. This marked a daunting challenge for the prosecution, making their case almost unviable. Norman Mills, Christie's father, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway. Dissatisfied with the way the detectives had worked, Norman took matters into his own hands. Immediately after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the area where Christie was found. They discovered a bloody pair of jean shorts and men's underwear in the woods. They turned the items over to the police, who had initially missed them. It was unclear whether these items were related to the case or if they had been examined for evidence. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense had two tasks: first and foremost, to prove Jack's innocence and also to try to identify the real killer. In fact, they already had a pretty strong candidate for the role, who they considered to be the prime suspect. The man who found Christ's body along with his wife was Henry Newell, who was 25 years old at the time of the murder. At the beginning of the trial, Jack's lawyers had amassed an impressive list of reasons to suspect Henry of murder, and during the trial, the list grew even longer. Initially, Henry attracted attention because of his criminal record. Beginning in his teenage years, he had been arrested multiple times for various crimes, serving 3 prison sentences. He had successfully escaped from prison twice before being captured and brought back. At the time of Jack's trial, he was serving his 4th sentence, this time for burning down a house to collect insurance money. Lawyers also reviewed evidence from Christ's case and found some very suspicious details in his testimony. Henry said he had found her body, ran over, and threw a bloody piece of wood aside. He explained this by saying that he was in a state of shock at the time. But acting like that still seemed odd. Why did he pick up the murder weapon and throw it from his body for no apparent reason? He also testified that he thought the girl was still alive, so he took off his shirt and pressed it to her face. This action also raised questions. Did he actually try to stop the bleeding, or was his shirt stained with blood during the murder, and he needed to justify it somehow? Jack's lawyer found a store clerk in the mall where Henry had run to call the police. She said he was not wearing a shirt but was wearing jean shorts, although by the time police arrived, he was wearing a different pair of pants. The employee also confirmed that Henry had a new bruise on his face, as if someone had hit him. When asked why she didn't immediately report this to the police, she said no one had asked her. The officers themselves should have noticed this bruising but ignored it. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but he ended up vomiting right on the machine. Another witness was Henry's neighbor, who said that on the night of the murder, he had talked to Henry and noticed many new scratches on his hands. The man also mentioned seeing a telephone cord in Henry's garage that was the same color and shape as the cord used to tie the victim's hands. That's not all. The neighbor said that Henry had once told him a very strange story. He claimed to know Christ's 14-year-old friend Carol and that they had once swum naked together in the pool. This story shocked everyone involved in the case. It turned out that Henry was acquainted with Carol, who was also directly involved in the case. His wife, Pam, also testified in court, saying everything had happened exactly as they told police on the first day. They had gone to the mall, and their son wanted to go for a walk. They went into the woods and found the body. Pam added that up until that point, Henry had remained at home and only stepped outside for a few minutes to scare away neighborhood children who had begun throwing firecrackers into their yard. Carol also testified, saying she had never met Henry. She was also asked about her intentions in telling Christ's mother that things should not have escalated to this point, but Carol again claimed she did not remember saying anything like that. Henry himself repeated his story without any changes and insisted that he had nothing to do with the crime. One of the most important moments of the trial was the showing of the entire recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching it, it became clear to everyone that Jack had simply been forced to confirm the detective's words that he had committed murder. Jack barely said anything and didn't seem to fully understand what the police wanted from him. But that was not the most important moment of the trial. On the 5th day, another unexpected witness appeared. It was Bobby, Henry's stepson, and his testimony truly shocked everyone following the case. Bobby revealed that that day, Henry had indeed gone out of the house to chase away the children who had thrown firecrackers into the yard. When Henry returned home, his shirt and sandals were missing, and Henry had scars on his hands and face. Bobby was told by his parents that they would be going to the shopping center, but when they arrived, they instead took him on a walk in the woods behind the center. Bobby claims he never asked to go for a walk, which contradicts what his parents initially said. During the walk, they found Henry's torn sandal and then Christy's body. Bobby's mother instructed him not to tell anyone about what he saw. At the trial, Bobby's grandmother testified about a disturbing comment made by Henry during Christy's farewell ceremony. After expressing her sadness about Christy's death, Henry replied, "It will teach her to keep her mouth shut." Another witness, Henry's friend, came forward and said that Henry had confessed to him that he accidentally killed Christy. Although the evidence clearly pointed to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor surprisingly announced that they would not pursue a case against Henry. The prosecutor also claimed that the initial investigation was handled correctly, despite acknowledging that the police missed or ignored many clues from the beginning. The public was outraged by this decision, leading the prosecutor to change his mind 2 days later and agree to reopen the investigation into Christie's death. Christie's father refused to give up on seeking justice and filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, but not because he believed Jack was involved in the murder. Rather, he hoped to gain access to the case files and gather more information. Unfortunately, this effort also proved unsuccessful. The case had remained stagnant until 2013, when Henry died of terminal cancer. Despite this, in the same year, former attorney John Aller became interested in the case and conducted his own investigation. He contacted all parties involved in gathering new information. Christie's relatives had provided John with a box of records that Christie's father had collected. After reviewing the records and talking to dozens of people, John believed that Henry was the culprit behind Christie's murder. John's investigation revealed that Carol had bought marijuana from Henry, which made him suspect that Henry was involved in the crime. This new discovery created a possible connection between Henry and Carol, which could explain why Carol brought Christie to the forest. One theory is that Carol planned to meet Henry in the forest to buy an illegal substance. It's possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a cover. A more sinister explanation suggests that Carol brought Christie to the forest at Henry's request, intending for him to harm her. However, Christie resisted, as evidenced by Henry's injuries, and he ultimately killed her. When John took over the case, Henry had passed away from cancer at the age of 63. However, John continued his work and released a book about Christie's murder. The release of the book sparked a new wave of interest, and Christie's relatives demanded that the investigation be reopened. Some of Henry's relatives also confirmed that Henry was the one who killed the girl. This led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. Detectives re-examined the evidence, interviewed dozens of people, and reassessed Henry's confession. They re-examined Christie's clothes and found traces of semen, but they were too small for DNA analysis. The investigation lasted until late 2015, when detectives announced that Henry was the one who had committed the crime. But because he had passed away, the case could not go to court. The investigation ended with the conclusion that Henry had left home, gone to the road behind the shopping center, seen Christie alone, and decided to assault her with a telephone cord, taking her deep into the woods. Henry had attacked Christie, injuring her. Then he killed her with a piece of wood. Returning home, Henry recounted the incident to his wife, and the two began to make plans to avoid punishment. For many years afterward, Carol never revealed the truth. Police later apologized to Christie's family for their careless handling of the incident. Hi there, investigators. It's time to uncover the truth behind another case. The case of Diana D. Aiello. Diana Aiello was born in 1959 in Tustin, a suburb of Los Angeles. Her father was in the military, and her mother worked at a local garment factory. At the age of 19, Diana met Kevin Green. When Diana was harassed by several men at a bar, Kevin intervened and chased the men away. In gratitude, Diana bought Kevin a drink. They went on a date a few days later, and their relationship quickly progressed. Kevin was in the process of divorcing his first wife. Kevin and Diana moved in together for a while, and Diana became pregnant. After Kevin's divorce was finalized, they got married. While waiting for their daughter to be born, they rented an apartment in Tustin. Kevin worked as a helicopter mechanic at a nearby Marine Corps base, while Diana stayed home to prepare for the baby's arrival, having previously worked with her mother in a garment factory. By late September 1979, Diana was nearly 9 months pregnant. On the evening of September 30th, Kevin and Diana got into an argument after watching a movie together. The impending birth of their daughter had put a strain on their relationship. To calm down and avoid escalating the situation, Kevin decided to drive to a nearby restaurant. About 40 minutes after the incident, Kevin called the local police department to report that his wife, Diana, had been shot and needed immediate medical attention. Police arrived on the scene shortly after receiving the call. When they entered the apartment, they found Diana lying on the bed, covered in blood, with a head wound that appeared to be a gunshot wound. However, upon closer examination, paramedics later determined that the wound was actually caused by blunt force trauma. When the police checked on Diana, found her alive and provided first aid until the ambulance arrived, they asked Kevin to leave the room. After the paramedics took over, they carefully transported Diana to the hospital. Meanwhile, the police asked Kevin to stay behind to give a statement. He told police that he and his wife had been arguing, so he decided to leave the apartment to calm down and buy some burgers at a fast food restaurant. In his haste, he realized he had left his keys inside, but chose not to go back to get them. Instead, he locked the door and went to his car. As Kevin drove away from the apartment complex, he noticed a truck with its back door open, and an African-American man walking back and forth toward the truck. It was late, around 2 a.m. He drove to the fast food restaurant he frequented, but it was busy, so he went to another location a few miles away. After buying a burger, he drove home, which took 40 minutes. When he arrived, he found the front door wide open. He rushed inside and found his wife, Diana, covered in blood. He immediately called the police. Kevin's story had some suspicious signs, but when the police checked the fast food bag, they found the food was still warm and the receipt confirmed the time and place of purchase, supporting Kevin's story. As a result, the police allowed Kevin to go to the hospital, but not before asking him to provide a blood sample for further investigation. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts could still compare the blood found at the crime scene with Kevin's blood type. When Diana arrived at the hospital, doctors determined that her head wound was not caused by a gunshot. Instead, it was likely inflicted by a small, heavy object. Unfortunately, Diana fell into a coma. The medical team worked diligently for several hours to save both her and her unborn child. After many hours of intense care, they were able to stabilize Diana's condition, but she still required surgery. During the investigation, police asked medical experts to determine whether Diana had been sexually assaulted. The experts confirmed that Diana had indeed been sexually assaulted, finding semen on her body. However, Kevin testified that he and Diana had had sex just hours before the argument. Diana and Kevin's family stayed in the hospital all night. And the next morning, the baby's condition suddenly took a turn for the worse. Doctors tried, but the baby did not survive. Although Diana remained in a coma, her chances of survival had improved. However, doctors warned that she could suffer long-term effects. Although Kevin had an alibi, police were not quick to clear him due to several inconsistencies in his story. He had an argument with Diana just hours before the attack, left his front door unlocked, and spent much of the time on a quick trip to a fast food restaurant. His claim of seeing a suspicious person near his home at night also raised suspicions. However, there was no concrete evidence linking Kevin to the crime. Police are investigating another suspect in a series of similar crimes in the area. A year earlier, a series of break-ins and assaults had occurred in Tustin and surrounding areas with similar modus operandi. In December 1978, a 17-year-old girl was killed after being beaten with a piece of wood and sexually assaulted. 4 months later, a 21-year-old woman was murdered and sexually assaulted. In July 1979, a woman was attacked in her apartment but survived, although she was in a coma for several weeks. Her testimony provided no new leads. Prior to Diana's attack, A similar attack occurred in September 1979, when a 34-year-old woman was murdered. A series of crimes occurred, all with striking similarities to the attack on Diana. The police believed they were dealing with a serial killer and focused their efforts on capturing him. To address the growing concern, the police decided to issue a public warning through the media, specifically targeting women living alone and those living in low-rise apartments, who appeared to be the serial killer's favorite targets. The warning caused panic, and in response, the police increased night patrols in the area. The police began by interviewing and soon received their first leads. Several of the victims' neighbors reported seeing a suspicious white man with thick black hair near their home. Although the description was somewhat vague, the police were able to identify several men who matched and investigate them. Unfortunately, these leads did not lead to any cases. A week after Diana was attacked, her doctors informed her loved ones that she had finally regained consciousness. However, there was a serious concern: Diana was unable to speak or remember anything. According to her doctors, her brain was still recovering. Around the same time, another attack occurred in Tustin. An unknown assailant broke into the apartment of a 24-year-old woman, striking her multiple times with a piece of wood and sexually assaulting her. Tragically, the victim died, and the police were once again unable to catch the perpetrator. Diana spent several days in the hospital, recovering from her injuries. During this time, her mind slowly cleared, but she had lost almost all of her memory. Doctors told her family that her memories might return, but warned them not to remind her of anything, letting her remember on her own. After being stabilized, Diana was discharged from the hospital and her family took her home. Her husband Kevin had to work at the military base, so Diana was sent to live with Diana's parents. 2 weeks later, another attack occurred in the city, similar to the one on Diana. This time, the attacker killed a 17-year-old girl. Diana began attending physical therapy sessions and her condition gradually improved. Although she still could not speak or remember the attack, a breakthrough occurred 6 weeks later during a therapy session. The doctor asked Diana if she could remember who attacked her. To the doctor's surprise, Diana suddenly pointed to her wedding ring. The doctor shared this information with Diana's mother when she came to pick her up. Diana's mother asked her daughter if her husband, Kevin, was the one who attacked her, and Diana nodded. Diana's mother immediately took her to the police station to speak with the chief. After asking Diana a few more questions, the police confirmed that she remembered her attacker and identified him as her husband, Kevin. This new information dramatically changed the course of the investigation. Police suspected that Diana's attack was related to a series of similar incidents in the area, committed by a serial offender. However, Kevin matched the suspect's description, leading police to question whether Kevin could be the culprit behind these attacks. The police asked Diana and her mother to pretend that Diana had not recovered her memory and to return home with Kevin. But they agreed to do so. Meanwhile, the police kept a close watch on Kevin, monitoring his every move in the hope of finding evidence of a crime linked to the serial murders. Crime scene testing revealed evidence under Diana's fingernails, where they found bloody skin particles, in addition to the attacker's semen. After analyzing the evidence, police found a match between the attacker's blood type and Kevin's blood sample, indicating that Kevin was the one who attacked Diana. As for a motive, police suspect that Diana's refusal to have sex with Kevin may have prompted the attack. Although Kevin insists that they had sex earlier that night. The police spoke to Diana, and she remembered the attack clearly, confirming that Kevin was her killer. During the conversation, her mother expressed that they could no longer live with Kevin, and the police decided to arrest him. To protect Diana's family, Kevin was arrested at a store instead of at their home. Despite his arrest, Kevin maintained his innocence. Preparations for the trial lasted 10 months, during which time Diana's health gradually improved. She regained her ability to speak. Diana was cleared of the charges, and her husband was found guilty of assaulting her. Kevin's defense team tried to use his fast food alibi, but it was not enough to disprove Diana's testimony. As a result, Kevin was convicted in November 1980 of the child's murder and assault on Diana. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. Police learned that two similar crimes had occurred in their district before Kevin was arrested, but both victims survived. Although the identity of the attacker remains unknown, these incidents raised suspicions that Kevin was involved in other crimes. The attacks stopped abruptly after Kevin was arrested. After Kevin's sentencing, Diana promptly filed for divorce, which Kevin did not contest. Diana then focused on her recovery. When Kevin became eligible for parole, the committee denied his request, a decision that was repeated 3 more times. The serial killer case remained unsolved until 1996, when police reopened the investigation. Semen samples from the victims, which had been stored in a laboratory, were retested. Police wanted to determine who the culprit was, and DNA analysis yielded a surprising result. Gerald Parker, a man arrested the same year as Kevin, was found to have a DNA match to the serial murders. After the DNA match confirmed Parker's involvement in the serial murders, investigators re-examined the attack on Diana. Parker and Kevin worked together on a military base, and Parker owned a dark-colored van, similar to the one described in the attacks. During his initial police interview, Kevin reported seeing an African-American man near a dark-colored truck in front of their home on the day of the attack. This information led police to consider the possibility that Parker was involved in the attack on Diana. While Kevin was in jail, the local prosecutor updated him on the progress of the bedroom basher serial murder investigation. The prosecutor asked Kevin to provide a DNA sample, which he quickly agreed to. While the DNA analysis was underway, police visited Parker in prison to discuss the case. Although they had not yet formally charged him with the attacks, they hoped to gather more information. Parker initially denied any involvement in the crimes, so detectives focused their questioning on the attack on Diana. During questioning, Parker revealed that on the night of the incident, he drove his truck to Kevin's house, intending to circle the neighborhood, looking through the ground floor windows for a victim. However, this time, he heard screaming coming from Kevin and Diana's apartment, and when Kevin left the house, Parker noticed that the door was unlocked, so he waited a few minutes before entering the apartment and attacking Diana. Parker revealed that he did not know Kevin's wife because they worked in different areas of the military base. He also confessed to committing 6 murders and 3 non-fatal attacks. After Parker's confessions, DNA evidence confirmed his guilt and Kevin's innocence. The prosecutor quickly moved to overturn Kevin's sentence, and he was released from prison after 16 years. The case has caused widespread outrage, not only because an innocent man spent nearly half his life in prison, but also because it took so long for police to identify the real killer. When Kevin was released, the state of California paid him $10,000 in compensation, a relatively small amount. Years later, he received an additional $100 for each day he spent in prison, totaling $620,000. Despite Kevin's exoneration, his wife Diana initially refused to believe he was innocent. She had previously claimed that Kevin was her only attacker. However, after DNA evidence from her body matched Parker's, she changed her story. Diana reported that Kevin attacked her before leaving the apartment, and then Parker entered and attacked her as well. However, Parker said that when he entered the house, Diana was lying on the bed without any injuries or signs of distress. He also admitted to hitting her on the head. Diana's family proposed an alternative theory, suggesting that Kevin might have conspired with Parker to commit the crime, which would explain why Kevin left the house that night, leaving the door open. However, Parker denied knowing Kevin, pointing out that the military base was large and many people didn't know each other personally. Parker denied knowing Kevin. Kevin also denied any involvement with Parker, insisting that he would never harm Diana or their unborn daughter. He explained that he left the door open because he didn't want to go back to get the keys after their argument. And he still blames himself for that decision. As for Parker, he was sentenced to death in 1999, but this sentence has yet to be carried out. After years of waiting on death row, California imposed a moratorium on executions, and as a result, Parker remains incarcerated to this day. Crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Debbie Lynn Randall. Debbie Lynn Randall was born on August 21, 1962, in Marietta, Georgia, to a loving family with two older brothers. Her parents divorced when she was young. Her mother later married a man named Roy, who became Debbie's stepfather. The family lived in a small apartment building. Debbie was a cheerful and sociable child. On the evening of January 13, 1972, after dinner with her family, Debbie went to the laundromat to supervise the laundry. Debbie's home was just a short distance from the laundromat, so her mother wasn't overly concerned about her safety when she was sent to do the laundry. The original plan was for Debbie to go with her brother, but he was feeling unwell, so Debbie's mother sent her husband to pick up the laundry and Debbie went with her stepfather, holding a box of laundry detergent. At the laundromat, Roy put the clothes in two washing machines and left, leaving Debbie waiting for the cycle to finish. After the wash, Debbie had to walk home and ask someone to pick up her clean clothes because she couldn't carry them herself. However, when the laundry should have been finished and Debbie still hadn't returned, her mother began to feel uneasy. It was getting dark outside, so she and her husband decided to walk to the laundromat to look for Debbie, but she was nowhere to be found. The employee informed them that Debbie had left the laundromat some time ago and had not returned. The news worried her mother, who began searching the surrounding streets with Roy. As they walked, they discovered a suspicious scene. A short distance from the laundromat, in the parking lot next to a car, there was a spilled detergent. Since Debbie had brought a box of detergent with her, her mother suspected that it might be hers. Despite expanding their search to the entire parking lot and the surrounding area, they found no other sign of Debbie. Neighbors who knew the family joined in the search. Debbie's mother decided to call the police for help. The police investigated the parking lot and discovered their first clue: spilled laundry detergent just inches from a parked car, and on the car door, they found several clear fingerprints. The police found fresh fingerprints on the car that were located lower than the handle, which seemed unusual. They suspected that an unknown person might have grabbed the girl while touching the car at this spot. The officers collected the fingerprints and sent them to forensic experts for analysis. They also started searching for the car's owner to confirm whether the fingerprints belonged to them. With no other leads, the police began a thorough search of the area, looking for new clues or witnesses. The laundry worker reported that she did not see anything suspicious. Debbie had waited for the laundry to finish, then left the building with the detergent box. It is possible that she went home to ask someone to pick up her clothes. Police discovered the first key witness, 12-year-old Sandra, who said that as she and her friend walked to a laundromat to drop off dirty clothes, they saw a man grab a girl on the street, drag her to his car parked near the laundromat, and drive away quickly while she screamed for help. Sandra and her friend were lucky to avoid the man's car. Debbie screamed in a car, but he did not slow down. At the time, Sandra did not consider what she saw to be a kidnapping. She assumed the man was a family member who had come to pick Debbie up, possibly against her will. So Sandra did not report the incident to the authorities or tell any adults about it. After learning about Debbie's disappearance, Sandra provided essential details to investigators. She described the abductor's vehicle as a dark-colored, likely 1957 model pickup truck. She also described the man as young, white, with thick dark hair, wearing a white t-shirt, jeans, and black work boots. Another key witness, a girl who lived in the same building as Debbie, shared her observations. She saw a dark-colored pickup truck drive past the apartment building on the evening in question. The girl initially thought the driver of the car was her uncle, but when he stopped in front of her and looked at her, she realized it was someone else. She described the driver as a white man with medium-length dark hair and provided additional details about his appearance. She also reported that he parked his car near their building, next to the same car where a detergent spill would later be discovered. Another witness, a man who lived near the girl's home, reported that a dark-colored pickup truck, possibly a Dodge, almost hit him while he was driving to visit his wife in the hospital. The driver appeared to be in his 30s with dark hair, and the witness saw a girl in the car trying to escape while the driver held her with one arm. Based on these accounts, the police believed Debbie had been kidnapped. They circulated the suspect's vehicle to all patrol units and created a composite sketch of the driver based on descriptions from witnesses. Some officers searched for similar vehicles and checked their owners, while others conducted a wide-ranging search for the girl. As the days passed, more volunteers and police from surrounding towns joined the search. Police questioned Debbie's family, and after investigation, they were all cleared as potential suspects. Debbie's biological father, who lived in the same city, was notified of her disappearance at work and immediately joined the search effort. Police also ran background checks on convicted criminals who lived near Debbie's home, but none of them appeared to be viable suspects. The search for Debbie continued for over 2 weeks without any significant leads. It wasn't until January 29th, when a group of students joined the search teams, that a breakthrough occurred. The students were sent to search a wooded area several miles from Debbie's house. After nearly 5 hours of searching, one of the students noticed a set of tracks on the ground that led from the trail into the forest, suggesting that something had been dragged into the woods. As they followed the trail about 150 feet into the woods, they discovered a human body and immediately contacted the police. Upon further inspection, they quickly identified the body as Debbie Randall. She was wearing the same outfit her mother had described on the day she went missing. However, her shoes were missing. The medical examination of Debbie's body revealed that she had been strangled to death and had also been sexually assaulted. A single dark hair was found on her body, which was likely to belong to the killer. Although DNA analysis was not available at the time, experts were able to examine the hair under a microscope and estimate that it came from a man between the ages of 18 and 30. The investigation then focused on the victim's clothing, which was covered in soil. Police enlisted the help of a geologist to analyze the soil, along with a forensic team. They discovered that some of the soil contained a type of soil mined less than 10 miles from their town called North Georgia clay. However, other stains on the clothing were found to be from a different type of clay, mined by a company just 2 miles from where the body was found. Police theorized that the perpetrator did not kill Debbie immediately, but rather drove her to remote areas, sexually assaulting her in one location and killing her in another, before finally dumping her body in the woods. Police believe the killer may have been hired by one of the nearby mining companies. After contacting these companies, the police searched the employees of both companies but did not find the suspect or the vehicle described by the victims. Furthermore, they found fingerprints near the abduction site, but unfortunately, when these fingerprints were compared to the suspects, there was no match. Debbie's death sent shockwaves through the city, with thousands attending her funeral. Police repeatedly ran into roadblocks in their search for clues. Police officer Morris Nix investigated many suspects and eventually narrowed the list down to 4 people. For Morris Nix, Debbie's murder remained a top priority throughout his career. The case took a breakthrough with the creation of the FBI's DNA database. Experts successfully extracted a genetic profile from hair found on Debbie's body, which was then entered into the database. However, no matches were found. In 2015, 43 years after the murder, police reopened the case and decided to re-examine the victim's clothing using modern technology. The clothing had been stored in an evidence vault since the crime. When re-examined, some of the evidence had degraded over time, resulting in only a partial DNA profile. In 2018, Debbie's mother gave an interview, expressing her hope that her daughter's killer would be found. After the tragedy, she found it unbearable to stay in their apartment, so she moved to another city. Her only wish was for the case to be solved before she died. Sadly, she died of cancer at the age of 78, just weeks after the interview, and was buried next to Debbie. In 2019, the local police department received additional funding, which allowed them to conduct a more thorough analysis of Debbie's clothing. This time, experts successfully extracted a full DNA sample, but unfortunately, the perpetrator's DNA was still not found in the FBI database. Debbie's father was interviewed and shared that he thought about his daughter every day for decades. Sadly, he passed away in 2022, shortly after the interview. Police turned their attention to the first piece of evidence they had, DNA. They partnered with a Florida company that specializes in an advanced DNA analysis technique called genomics. Police provided the company with all the biological samples they had collected over the years and waited for the results. Experts created a DNA profile of the suspect and began searching for his relatives in public genetic databases. After analyzing thousands of potential relatives of the killer, investigators narrowed their search to a family in Marietta. In 2023, police asked the family to provide a DNA sample, which they agreed to. Analysis showed that the killer was indeed a close relative of the family. Experts re-examined the family tree and quickly identified a man named William Rose. However, William Rose committed suicide in 1974, just 2 years after Debbie's murder. Police obtained a warrant to exhume William Rose's remains and took a sample of William Rose's DNA for analysis. 51 years after Debbie's murder, police finally identified William Rose as the killer. At the time of the murder, William Rose, 24, lived in the same building as Debbie's family, and he visited them frequently. The case has finally been solved. Debbie's brother, Melvin, is the only living relative. Melvin attended a press conference and expressed gratitude to everyone involved in solving the case that lasted more than 50 years. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore, the case of Tara Baker. Tara Baker was born on January 20, 1977, in East Point, Georgia. Her parents divorced when she was young, and her mother later remarried. She is the eldest of 4 siblings. From an early age, she showed a strong interest in the legal system, with the desire to pursue a career as a lawyer or judge. She would often engage in mock trials with her stuffed animals, create contracts with her relatives, and even write letters to politicians, including the President of the United States, to express her opinions. After high school, Tara attended Georgia College, where she earned 2 bachelor's degrees in just 3 years, graduating in 1999. She then enrolled at the University of Georgia, one of the top law schools in the country, located in Athens, a small town close to her parents' home. To avoid dorm life, Tara rented a house with 2 other university students, one of whom she knew from college. Tara worked at a prestigious law firm in downtown Athens, covering her expenses and gaining valuable experience in her future profession. In January 2001, Tara spent a lot of time studying at the university library. On the evening of January 18th, she went to the library to study with a friend. Her friend left the library around 7:30 p.m. Tara stayed behind, calling her friend at 9:46 p.m. to check if she had arrived home safely, mentioning that she would head home soon. The next day, around 6 p.m., Tara's mother, Virginia Baker, received a phone call from a woman who identified herself as a detective. The detective tells Virginia that they need her daughter Tara's fingerprints for their current investigation. Believing it was a prank, Virginia hung up, but her curiosity got the better of her. She decided to call the Athens police station to verify the call. Police said the caller was actually a forensic detective, and they further informed her that there had been a fire at Tara's home. The detective explained that they were trying to locate Tara, but so far, they had only found one of Tara's roommates, who had been out at the time of the fire. The other roommate was also missing, and investigators suspected that the unidentified body they found might be one of them. Virginia was desperate for information and asked the detective to describe the room where the body was found. The detective's response sent a chill down Tara's spine. The room was filled with Tara antique items, which she had spent years collecting. Virginia and her family immediately drove to Athens to see what was happening to their daughter, hoping that it was just a misunderstanding and that Tara was safe. Upon arriving at the police station, they were forced to wait for several hours without receiving any updates. Eventually, a detective emerged and delivered the devastating news. The body found in the house was indeed Tara's, and her death was a result of murder, not the fire. However, the detective was exhausted and declined to answer any questions. Before departing, he shared one crucial detail. Tara had inadvertently left behind a clue. Fragments of the perpetrator's skin were found under her fingernails, which could potentially aid in identifying the killer. Tara's family was shocked, confused, and hopeless by the news. Despite their requests for more information about Tara, the police remained silent, not providing any further details. The family of Tara Baker was left in the dark about her murder investigation. Despite their repeated attempts to get information from detectives, they were met with silence. The local police department never reached out to them, forcing the family to constantly call and visit the station to beg for updates. Through persistence, they were able to gather some details about the case. Firefighters were called to Tara's address on January 19th at approximately 11 a.m. in response to a fire. After extinguishing the flames, they found Tara's body inside. The medical examiner's report confirmed that she had been murdered, with signs of strangulation and stab wounds. It appeared that the killer had set the fire to destroy evidence after Tara's death. However, the police refused to share the medical examiner's report with Tara's parents, leaving them without crucial information about her murder. The family also discovered that some evidence may have been destroyed by the firefighters. Unfortunately, this is not uncommon in cases like this. Investigators may not have properly secured the crime scene, which could have resulted in the loss of evidence. As Tara's family sought answers about her death, they were met with a lack of transparency and disrespect from the police. They were not kept informed about the investigation, were often treated rudely and unprofessionally. In an attempt to hold the police accountable, they began to record their conversations and filed complaints, but these efforts yielded no results. The family sought the advice of a renowned criminologist. However, the local police department would only allow him to review the case materials under one condition: he was not to share any information or findings with Tara's relatives. This left Tara's family unable to find answers about her death. Tara's family waited 10 years to get her death certificate. After writing to the state governor, they finally received it, but it didn't give them the answers they were looking for. Instead of explaining what caused her death, the certificate simply stated that she died from multiple injuries, without providing any further details. Despite the police continued their investigation, but their actions raised several questions. When Tara's body was discovered, firefighters immediately called the police, recognizing that a murder had taken place. But the crime scene was seriously destroyed due to extensive damage from the fire and water used to extinguish it. Furthermore, the family later discovered that some surviving items at the crime scene were not examined for fingerprints. Tara's laptop was found missing from her room, but other valuables were intact. Since there was no evidence of forced entry, investigators suspected that Tara was familiar with her killer and had voluntarily allowed them into her room. Although the crime scene was heavily damaged due to the fire, investigators established that Tara's two roommates were away from town at the time, leaving Tara home alone. Because it was difficult to determine the exact time of death, medical experts narrowed the window down to a time frame of 10 p.m., when Tara left the library, to 11 a.m., when neighbors called the fire department. The likelihood of the crime occurring during the early morning hours, given the speed at which the fire spread. The police investigation uncovered two significant leads. One involved a witness who reported seeing a middle-aged white man running down the street on the morning of the murder, wearing only a t-shirt and jeans despite the winter weather. Additionally, the police discovered a suspicious phone call made to Tara's university a few days before her death. A heavily intoxicated man had called the university's student information line. The man managed to correctly provide Tara Baker's name and request her phone number. Although the phone call was highly suspicious, the police were unable to identify the caller. Meanwhile, Tara's boyfriend became an immediate person of interest in the investigation. He provided an alibi, which was verified by the police, but they continued to view him with suspicion. Police have repeatedly questioned him and asked him to provide additional biological samples, answer additional questions, or undergo a lie detector test. Tara's boyfriend was asked to identify her body after the fire. He had traveled from another city to Athens as soon as he heard the news. Although Tara's parents were already in town, the police requested that the boyfriend make the identification. However, he was not allowed to enter the house. Instead, a police officer took a photograph of the body and showed it to him on a camera screen. The boyfriend was shocked and unsure if the body was Tara's. To confirm, he asked to see a pair of earrings he had given her. The officer retrieved the earrings from the body Tara's and showed them to him. After seeing the earrings, the boyfriend confirmed that the body was indeed Tara's. The police then shifted their focus to a male student who had a reputation for being troublesome. Several female students reported that he had repeatedly asked them out on dates, despite being told no, and made them feel uncomfortable with his behavior. The student had also asked Tara out multiple times, despite knowing she had a boyfriend. Detectives investigated the student but found no evidence linking him to the crime. They even asked Tara's friends to monitor the boy's activities, but this did not bring any new progress. Detectives began to focus on another suspect, a guy who was Tara's co-worker. When they interviewed his co-workers, they discovered that his behavior in the days leading up to the murders was very strange. Specifically, he had stopped socializing with a group of close co-workers. Additionally, just days before the murders, he had told Tara that he would not be able to attend her birthday party, which was scheduled for the day after the murders. On the morning of January 19th, one of Tara's co-workers tried to convince him to attend birthday celebration, as Tara had been hurt by his initial refusal. When the colleague visited the attorney's office, however, he was nowhere to be found. This was unusual, as the attorney was typically present at the office in the mornings. A check of his work schedule revealed no meetings or appointments, adding to the mystery of his absence. His behavior raised suspicions after Tara's murder. He was absent on the day of the murder, but the next day, he visited a colleague's home and acted strangely. Many suspect that he regularly used illegal drugs, which may have contributed to his erratic behavior. The co-worker noticed several fresh scratches on his neck, which were notable because several pieces of skin were found under Tara's fingernails, suggesting that she may have scratched her attacker in self-defense. When questioned about the scratches, he claimed he got them from a cat and denied any involvement in Tara's murder. However, when asked about his suspicions regarding the killer, his response was unusual. He screams that Tara's father is the culprit, but he cannot produce any evidence to back up his accusation. Furthermore, he resigned from his position just a few months after the murder and left the state. It is unclear whether the police compared his DNA with the samples found under Tara's nails. But they have not shared any information about this aspect of the investigation, even with Tara's relatives. The police discovered that he was married, but still secretly dated 2 female colleagues. This revelation could explain his unusual behavior and unexplained absences from work. Both women also suspected that he was using illicit substances. However, police found no evidence to prove his involvement in the murder and eventually cleared him as a suspect. The detectives also investigated the maintenance company employees who had access to the house where Tara lived. They had a spare key, which might explain why there was no sign of forced entry. Unfortunately, this lead also yielded no results. Since then, the case has had no new clues. The police continue to search for new suspects and witnesses, but they are keeping many details about their investigation under wraps to avoid it being undermined. The investigation into Tara's murder continued over the years, with several new leads emerging, but it did not yield any results for the investigation. One witness reported seeing an African-American man near Tara's house on the day of the fire, while another claimed to have seen blood on a classmate's notebook shortly after the murder. Despite police efforts to pursue these leads, they ultimately led to dead ends. Tara's parents offered a $77,000 reward in hopes of generating new leads. The detective team working on the case changed several times, but they all encountered considerable difficulties due to lack of evidence. The fire in Tara's room burned most of the evidence, leaving the police with few clues to investigate. 19 years after Tara's murder, a podcast about her case was released, generating renewed interest and attention. The podcast gathered information from Tara's family and individuals connected to the case, re-examining the evidence and helped reinvestigate the case. The police department took notice of the podcast, leading to better cooperation between detectives and Tara's family. For several months, detectives reviewed all available information and evidence, using modern DNA analysis tools to re-examine the evidence. Their efforts paid off on May 13, 2024, when police announced that they had finally arrested the perpetrator, 23 years after the murder. The suspect, Edric Lamont Faust, 48, was arrested, but police did not reveal how they identified the suspect, citing the need to keep some information secret to protect ongoing legal proceedings. Investigators only mentioned that modern DNA analysis tools and other biological evidence played a crucial role in Edric's identification. Further details of the case were not disclosed at the press conference, and police chose to withhold evidence to avoid compromising Edric's trial. However, his arrest documents revealed that he was accused of assaulting Tara. Additionally, a piece of skin was found under Tara's fingernails, which was used to extract the killer's DNA using modern DNA analysis tools. The police had likely known about Edric for years due to his long history of crime, which included multiple arrests. At the time of Tara's murder, he was 25 and lived in the same city as she. Despite this, the police initially found no evidence suggesting that Edric knew Tara. It wasn't until recently, thanks to advanced DNA analysis, that Edric became a suspect in the case. Detectives only started investigating him a few days before his arrest. Edric is currently in jail awaiting trial. The police are confident that they have found the right person, as they obtained irrefutable DNA evidence. As a result, Edric was denied bail, and Tara's case is now considered closed. Tara's family finally finds out the truth after 23 years. Thanks to a new team of detectives who reopen the case and solve it. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery, the case of Mitzi Sanchez. Mitzi Sanchez was born on August 10, 1992, in Vallejo, California. She grew up in a large, with 2 brothers and a sister. As a child, Mitzi was cheerful and bright, enjoying time outdoors with friends and playing with her siblings. From a young age, she demonstrated independence, often walking to elementary school with her brother without adult supervision, as the school was nearby. On August 10, 2000, Mitzi's 8th birthday, she was excited about the celebration party her family had planned. However, when she asked her mom if she could skip school, the request was denied. Upset, Mitzi left her home with her brother at around 7:30 a.m. The plan was for her to wait for her brother after classes, and they would walk home together. But when her brother went outside the school, he couldn't find Mitzi. Assuming she had already left without him, he headed home alone. However, when he arrived home, Mitzi had disappeared without a trace. Mitzi's older sister grew concerned when she realized Mitzi was missing, especially since her birthday party was supposed to take place that day. As her absence seemed unusual, the sister called their mother around 4 p.m. to report the situation. The mother immediately contacted Mitzi's school and confirmed that Mitzi had attended all her classes that day. However, when the mother reached out to family members and Mitzi's friends, no one had seen her after school. Mitzi's family became worried and started looking for her. Family, friends, and neighbors mounted a massive search operation. Some walked the streets, while others went door to door along the route from her home to school, asking locals if they had seen her. They also distributed flyers with information about Mitzi. Despite their extensive efforts, they were unable to find her, leading Mitzi's parents to call 911 for assistance. The police quickly joined the search and local media started covering the case. The news of Mitzi's disappearance spread quickly, not just in local news outlets but also across the state. Mitzi's family has given several interviews to raise awareness of her disappearance. Her mother desperately pleaded with them to return her daughter safely. The police received a lot of information, but none of it was useful. 24 hours after Mitzi went missing, the investigation had new clues. A man contacted the police to report finding bloody rags at a landfill. After further examination, experts discovered that the rags were actually bed sheets from a hotel in Vallejo. The evidence was sent to the lab for analysis, but it would take several days to obtain the results. Investigators also went to the hotel, but they were unable to confirm whether Mitzi was there. As the investigators waited for the lab results, they thoroughly searched the landfill for any additional clues, but they found nothing. However, the next day, August 12th, the police received a call that changed the course of the investigation. At around 11 a.m., a man called the police to report a disturbing incident. While driving through an industrial area in Santa Clara, he saw a little girl running towards his van, screaming that someone was chasing her. The girl quickly got into the van, and the driver saw a man running in their direction. A young girl escaped from her kidnapper and sought help from a van driver. As soon as she got into the truck, the kidnapper quickly fled the scene. The girl, who identified herself as Mitzi Sanchez, told the driver what had happened, and he immediately contacted the police. The officers quickly took Mitzi to a hospital for a medical examination. They also arranged for her to speak with her mother over the phone, and soon her relatives arrived at the hospital, where they were reunited with Mitzi. The van driver proved to be a valuable witness in the investigation. He was able to provide the police with the license plate number of the kidnapper's vehicle, which he had seen as it sped away. The truck driver happened to be on the road that day, which was lucky. If he hadn't been there, the kidnapper might have caught up with Mitzi. The police checked the license plate and discovered that the car belonged to 39-year-old Curtis Dean Anderson, a man with a history of crime. He had previous convictions for theft and kidnapping, and was also suspected of other offenses. Police took a statement from Mitzi about what happened to her. Mitzi recounted that on August 10th, she was excited to finish school and head home to celebrate her birthday with her family. When her last class ended, she decided not to wait for her brother and walked home alone. As she walked, she noticed a car parked by the side of the road about a few hundred yards away. Inside, a man was watching her through the rearview mirror. The girl felt uncomfortable, but she was not worried because it was daytime and she was walking on a familiar street. In addition, because she was young, she was not aware of the potential risks posed by strangers. Mitzi was approached by a man who got out of his car and asked for her help. He claimed to have a leg injury from an accident and needed assistance in retrieving a roll of tape from under the car seat. Despite feeling uneasy, Mitzi agreed to help, as her parents had taught her to assist others in need. However, as soon as Mitzi reached for the tape, the man's intentions became clear. He pushed her into the car, covered her mouth, and slammed the door shut. Mitzi tried to scream, but it was too late. The man drove away, Mitzi to watch in horror as they passed by her home, where her family was preparing to celebrate her birthday. The man eventually stopped in a deserted parking lot, where he gave Mitzi new clothes and forced her to change. He then threw away her old clothes in a nearby trash bin. He warned Mitzi not to try to escape, claiming he had a gun and that no one had ever managed to escape from him. For the next few hours, Mitzi was driven to an unknown location. Mitzi demanded to know why she had been kidnapped. But the man's response was that he had gone through a similar experience as a child. When night fell, he stopped the car again and began covering the windows with rags to conceal their location. He then shackled Mitzi's leg with a chain and padlock. The man pulled out a bottle of alcohol and insisted that Mitzi drink some. Despite her initial reluctance, she eventually gave in. He took pictures of her using a camera. The perpetrator then lay down in the car to sleep. Fearing that she would be at his mercy if she fell asleep, Mitzi stayed awake and began thinking of an escape plan. Her chance came when she saw a police car driving past the parking lot. However, it was too far away, and she realized that even if she screamed, the officers would not be able to hear her. The next day, the perpetrator continued to drive Mitzi around the city, forcing her to sit on the floor of the car and covering her with sheets to conceal her from view. At one point, he briefly stepped out of the vehicle, giving Mitzi an opportunity to try and escape. She attempted to free her leg from the chain but quickly realized it was impossible. She also found a nail file and tried to use it to unlock the padlock, but unfortunately, it didn't work. When the perpetrator returned to the car and drove away, he made a disturbing claim. He had stopped by Mitzi's parents' house. Under the guise of a good citizen, he asked for flyers to distribute around town, further manipulating the situation. Mitzi was left feeling shocked and overwhelmed, knowing she had been so close to home yet still remained in captivity. Over the next few hours, the perpetrator repeatedly stopped the car, getting in and out. Eventually, he drove to a remote area outside of town and parked. There, he committed a sexual assault against Mitzi, leaving her in a state of shock. Afterward, the perpetrator fell asleep. The next morning, he resumed driving, making several stops to buy cigarettes and alcohol. When he returned to the car and leaned into the cabin, an object fell out of his pocket. He warned Mitzi not to look, but she disobeyed. She glanced down and saw a large set of keys. Mitzi quickly realized that one of the keys could open the lock on her chain. Although afraid of the perpetrator's possible reaction, Mitzi was brave enough to act. She grabbed the keys, selected one that seemed to fit the lock best, and tried to unlock it. To her relief, the key worked. Mitzi managed to free herself from the chain and moved towards the car door, which was the last barrier between her and freedom. To escape, she opened the window and tried to climb out. However, her body was exhausted, and her legs had almost no strength left. Using the last of my strength, she pushed herself upwards and finally jumped out of the car. As she moved around it, she spotted her kidnapper, who instantly saw her as well. He yelled for her to come back, but Mitzi had no intention of surrendering. She took off in the opposite direction, and her kidnapper started chasing after her. As she fled, she attempted to get help from passing cars by waving her hands and screaming, but all the cars ignored her pleas and kept driving by. Not losing hope, Mitzi kept running forward. In her desperate situation, every moment seemed like an eternity. Mitzi is driven by the fear that if she stops even for a moment, she will be captured by the perpetrator, a fate she is determined to avoid. Finally, she spotted a van and she ran towards it, jumping in front of it to stop the driver. The driver quickly halted, and Mitzi climbed into the cabin, exhausted, dehydrated, and starving, but safe. At the hospital, she received the medical attention she needed, and her family soon arrived to be reunited with her. Mitzi's story quickly became top news in town. When she returned home, thousands of people gathered on her street, cheering and shouting birthday wishes she had missed while in captivity. Meanwhile, the police were searching for her kidnapper, whose location remained unknown. During the investigation, the police showed Mitzi's mother a photo of the suspect, and she recognized him. She had seen him twice before, once before Mitzi's abduction, when he was standing on their street, staring at their house, and again the day after Mitzi's disappearance, when he came to their home asking for flyers. Police eventually arrested the suspect, Curtis. He confessed to Mitzi that she was not his first victim and that no one had ever managed to escape him before. Curtis's careful planning and execution suggested he had experience with similar crimes. It is notable that Curtis had a prior conviction for kidnapping a woman in 1991, for which he served time until his release in November 1999. The trial began in April of the same year. Mitzi bravely testified in a crowded courtroom, recounting every detail of Curtis's crimes against her. Even though Curtis was there, Mitzi remained calm and completed his mission. As a result, Curtis received a 251-year prison sentence. However, this marked the beginning of a new chapter in the investigation. Detectives regularly visited Curtis in jail, questioning him about potential involvement in other crimes. One of these visits, they discovered that Curtis had confessed to a fellow inmate about kidnapping and murdering 8 additional girls. The inmate agreed to cooperate with the police, sharing Curtis's confession in detail. However, Curtis himself was reluctant to reveal all his secrets. Instead of denying the allegations, he attempted to negotiate privileges in exchange for information, speaking with detectives in riddles. As for Mitzi, she was constantly bullied and ridiculed by her classmates, labeling her the kidnapped girl. They even told her she should have died instead of being rescued. The constant bullying made her school years extremely difficult, which hindered her recovery from the traumatic experience. Mitzi could no longer handle the immense pressure. As a result, she turned to alcohol as a means of coping with stress, relying more and more on it. Eventually, she lost hope of returning to a normal life. However, a car accident after a party with friends changes her life forever. Mitzi suffered serious injuries, including a broken neck and arm, and spent 2 weeks in a coma. Upon waking up, she received news from her doctors. She was pregnant with a daughter. This gave Mitzi the power to change her life for the better. She decided to devote herself entirely to her daughter and also to helping other children who were victims of various crimes. Mitzi went on to found a non-profit organization that continues to help those in need to this day. As for Curtis, he passed away in 2007 due to illness, just 6 years after being sentenced. The detectives' only regret was that they were unable to obtain full confessions from him regarding other cases he was suspected of being involved in. Notably, his son followed a similar path and was also convicted of murder. Unfortunately, the son's life was cut short in prison in 2019. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zoe Hastings. Zoe Hastings was born on November 21, 1996, in Kansas, as the oldest of 5 children. She was a responsible sibling, often putting her parents' needs before her own. Her family was deeply rooted in their faith, spending a significant amount of time at church. When Zoe was in high school, her family moved to Dallas, where she attended a school that fostered her creativity and passion for the arts. She excelled in drawing and enjoyed participating in school plays. Outside of school, Zoe worked at an art studio and as a lifeguard during her summer breaks. After graduating, Zoe had the opportunity to attend top universities, but she decided to delay her education to focus on her church. In October 2015, at the age of 18, Zoe was preparing for a mission trip with her church. She planned to attend the Sunday service to discuss the trip's details. Zoe left her house around 4:40 p.m. in the family minivan, promising her parents she would return for dinner. However, she failed to come back, which was unusual for her. Zoe's parents tried to reach her after the service, but she didn't respond to their messages or calls. They then contacted her friends, thinking she might have visited someone, but no one had seen her. As the evening wore on, her parents grew increasingly worried and decided to call the church to see if Zoe had shown up there. However, they were surprised to learn that Zoe had never arrived at the church. This was highly unusual behavior for Zoe, as she had always kept her parents informed of her current whereabouts and had never disappeared without explanation. So they drove themselves to the police station to report Zoe missing, and the police began the search. The police spent all night retracing the route from Zoe's house to the church but found no sign of Zoe. Using an iPhone tracking app, police were able to locate her phone. They discovered Zoe's phone just a few hundred yards from the church, near a small creek across the street. Zoe's parents rushed to the creek. An officer approached them and informed them that a car accident had been reported a few hours earlier and that police had received a call from a witness walking a dog. That witness claimed that a man had approached him and said that a woman had been injured in a car accident near the creek. The witness rushed to the scene and found a woman lying in a pool of blood, so he called 911. As the police investigated, they quickly identified the victim as Zoe Hastings. However, it soon became clear that she had not died as a result of the accident. The evidence suggested that she had been murdered. Zoe's body was found a short distance from the minivan, which was partially submerged in the creek. There was a significant amount of blood near her body, and police observed multiple cuts on her neck. Her dress was pulled up, and her underwear was rolled down, leading detectives to suspect that the killer had likely assaulted and abused her. The police prevented Zoe's parents from approaching her body, shielding them from the gruesome scene. As they investigated further, they discovered several clues. Notably, all the minivan doors except the driver's side were locked, suggesting that the perpetrator may have driven the vehicle themselves or approached Zoe directly at the scene. Beneath the bridge, about 10 feet from the creek, a blood-stained knife was discovered. It's likely that this was the weapon used in Zoe's murder. By examining her phone records and GPS data, investigators established that Zoe had arrived at the creek by 5:01 p.m. after leaving home at 4:41 p.m. GPS revealed she drove there in approximately 20 minutes, indicating her death probably occurred within a few minutes of arrival. To account for this timeline, investigators reconstructed her activities that afternoon, tracing her stops from leaving her home. During the examination, investigators uncovered evidence. Zoe visited the nearby DVD rental store after departing home. To return a DVD she borrowed from that rental shop situated beside a Walgreens, near her place of residence. More than 50 people near that area had confirmed it. Among them had been Lester Clark, a tattoo shop employee who had worked next door to the DVD store. It wasn't until a few hours after work around 4:45 p.m. that Lester revealed he had seen a female customer who had been shopping at the store and had approached her. Lester admitted to having witnessed Zoe going to the DVD rental store. Lester added that he saw a man behaving suspiciously near the crime scene. Lester described the man as short and heavily built, and African American. However, Lester was too far away to notice any other distinguishing features. Later that evening, Lester saw the same man walking towards the store alone. The second witness, Gary Whitman, a homeless man, corroborated Lester's account. At around 4:45 p.m., Gary saw a woman approaching a white minivan in the parking lot. A man then approached her from behind, preventing her from entering the vehicle. The man showed her something from his pocket, and the woman subsequently got into the car, moving to the passenger seat. The man then drove away. Gary also described the suspect as short and heavily built, and African American, and found the situation highly suspicious. He went into the store and asked the clerk to call 911, but it is unclear if the clerk made the call. During the investigation, experts made several key discoveries. A forensic pathologist examined Zoe's body and found a small amount of male semen, indicating that Zoe had been sexually assaulted before being murdered. However, the amount of semen was too small to conduct a full DNA analysis. Investigators analyzed Zoe's car for any foreign fingerprints on the doors or steering wheel, but found none. This discovery, combined with witness statements, suggested that the killer may have driven Zoe away in her minivan. However, the lack of fingerprints did not mean that the killer did not drive the car, as they may have wiped down the surfaces after the crime. When examining Zoe's body, investigators found several hairs, but they were too small to extract a full DNA sample from. However, a breakthrough came when a DNA sample was found on a knife near the crime scene. The DNA was matched to 34-year-old Antonio Cochran, who had a violent criminal history, including arrests for theft, assault, and home invasion. 1 year before the murder, Antonio was accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old girl, the daughter of his girlfriend. According to the girl, Antonio offered her a ride, but took her to a secluded area and assaulted her. He was arrested and claimed that the sex was consensual, but the prosecution was unable to prove his guilt, and he was acquitted. Antonio became the prime suspect in the murder investigation. As a result, he was arrested. However, during the interrogation, Antonio denied any involvement in the crime. To gather more evidence, investigators collected a DNA sample from Antonio and compared it to the semen found on the victim's body. Unfortunately, both DNA samples were too small for a full analysis, so the experts used a different method. The partial DNA profiles from the hair and semen were then compared to Antonio's DNA. The results showed that it was matched, but not definitively. Meanwhile, detectives searched Antonio's smartphone and found some incriminating text messages. On the day before the murder, Antonio sent a message to a friend he lived with, stating he was moving out and would never see him again. At 1:48 a.m. the next day, Antonio sent another message to his ex-girlfriend, telling her that his stepmother had died right in front of him. But this information was later found to be false. In the hour leading up to Zoe's death, Antonio sent 2 texts to another woman, revealing that he had been drinking, driving around the city, and crying. These messages were his last before the incident. Later that evening, at 9:30 p.m., Antonio texted a friend, expressing confusion and despair about his life. The next day, he sent a message to his ex-girlfriend, stating that his life was over and that she would soon understand why. Detectives investigating Antonio's online activities found that he had visited local news websites over 30 times before his arrest, with a particular focus on the crime sections. Notably, 5 of these access were directly related to articles about Zoe's murder. This was unusual, as prior to the death of Zoe, Antonio rarely visited news sites. His browser history also showed a single visit to a page about gang activity. Further investigation of Antonio's smartphone revealed GPS data that, at 4:34 p.m., Antonio's phone connected to a cell tower covering the area where the store was located, coinciding with the time Zoe was there. Although this data was not conclusive evidence, it suggested that Antonio's phone was in the vicinity of the store just minutes before Zoe left the parking lot. This was significant, as Antonio's home was far away, and his phone had been connected to a different nearby tower throughout the day. Detectives discovered that Antonio had started working at a grocery store just 3 days before the incident. However, on the day after the murder, he skipped his shift without providing any explanation. Despite the extensive circumstantial evidence against Antonio, the strongest evidence remained his DNA on the knife handle. Nevertheless, this evidence alone might not be enough for a conviction, as merely holding a knife does not prove involvement in the murder. It is possible that Antonio used the knife in a different context, and someone else could have used it to commit the crime. Since no other evidence was found, detectives decided to proceed with the case and take it to court. The prosecution presented its report of the events. According to the prosecution, Antonio approached Zoe in the parking lot, threatening her with a knife and forcing her to get into her car. He then took the driver's seat and drove away. The prosecution argued that Antonio, who was emotionally distressed due to the death of a relative and intoxicated from consuming a significant amount of alcohol. The investigators' theory was that Antonio had intended to assault Zoe when he abducted her. He chose his victim, Zoe, by chance when he spotted her in the parking lot. Antonio saw an opportunity to commit a crime and acted on it. He then drove to a secluded creek area that was difficult to spot due to the surrounding trees and low-lying terrain. At this location, he forced Zoe out of the car and attacked her, stabbing her 6 times in the neck area. Antonio got back into the car and tried to drive it into the creek, possibly to hide any remaining evidence. However, the car only partially submerged, allowing Antonio to potentially wipe his fingerprints from the steering wheel and door handle before fleeing the scene and return to the store, where Lester had seen him according to initial testimony. The defense argued that most of the evidence was not convincing enough and did not prove Antonio's guilt. For example, hair analysis only showed that the DNA could not be ruled out as belonging to Antonio. But it did not confirm his involvement. DNA on the knife also did not necessarily prove that Antonio committed murder. The defense argued that Antonio could have touched the knife under different circumstances before working at the store. They suggested he might have used the knife while working at a movie theater, where he sometimes collected items left behind by visitors. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Furthermore, if someone had taken the knife from the theater and used it to commit the murder, they would have had to be careful to avoid removing Antonio's DNA from the handle, which would have been a difficult task. The defense attempted to downplay the testimony of the second witness, Gary, by revealing that Gary had a warrant for his arrest due to a parole violation. They tried to exclude Gary's testimony, but the prosecution argued that Gary's willingness to cooperate with police, despite the risk of arrest, proved his sincerity. Gary insisted he wanted to do the right thing, even if it meant getting arrested. Antonio's lawyers argued that their client was elsewhere at the time of Zoe's murder in order to helping a friend, but they failed to provide any substantial evidence to support this claim. Initially, the prosecution sought the death penalty for Antonio, but as the trial progressed, they realized this would be difficult to achieve with the available evidence. They dropped the request for the death penalty. After a lengthy deliberation, the jury found Antonio guilty of murder and sentenced him to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Zoe's parents expressed gratitude to the investigators and all those involved in the trial for delivering justice for their daughter. Her father shared that he had always warned his children about the dangers of the world and had taken every precaution to protect them. However, despite his efforts, his eldest daughter was abducted just a short distance from their home, and he was powerless to prevent it. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Crystal Perry. Crystal Perry had been born on August 23, 1963, in Rumford, Maine, the youngest of 10 children. Her parents had faced significant difficulties providing for their large family, leading Crystal and her siblings to grow up independent. Crystal and her siblings had always wanted to build their own lives as soon as possible. They eventually moved to different cities and states in search of new opportunities. Crystal had met her future husband Tom in high school. Crystal and Tom married and initially moved to California, but Crystal soon discovered that life in the city was not right for her. After a year and a half, they decided to return to Maine, settling in the small town of Bridgeton, about an hour from Crystal's hometown of Rumford. Crystal found a job at a local shoe store, while Tom worked various odd jobs. Crystal and Tom's lives took a new turn when Crystal became pregnant and they welcomed daughter Sarah. Although Tom was initially excited to become a father, Sarah's arrival complicated Tom's relationship with Crystal. Tom began spending more and more time at a local bar, spending almost all of their limited income on alcohol. One time, he even took the money Crystal had saved to buy alcohol, leaving them with almost nothing. As Tom's drinking habits worsened, the family did not have enough money for basic needs, including food. Finally, Crystal decided to file for divorce. After the divorce, Tom occasionally saw Sarah, but he was largely absent from her life. The situation got worse when Tom got a new girlfriend and she started harassing Crystal. This girlfriend would call Crystal, make threats, come to her house, and cause provocations, all because she was upset with Crystal's past relationship with Tom. Crystal's fears for Sarah's safety grew and she became hesitant to let her daughter visit Tom, worried that Tom's new girlfriend might actually harm Sarah. Crystal moved in with her mother and worked hard to save enough money to buy her own house. After years of saving, she bought a small house near a peaceful lake on the outskirts of Bridgeton. Crystal was excited to provide a stable and loving environment for her daughter, Sarah. Crystal prioritized giving Sarah the attention and love she deserved. In their free time, Crystal and Sarah enjoyed spending quality time together, often watching movies or chatting with each other. One day was like any other day. Crystal went to work, and Sarah went to school. They had their usual dinner together, and Crystal carried Sarah to bed. However, a few hours later, Sarah's peaceful night was broken by a loud scream that startled her. At first, she thought Crystal was arguing on the phone, but it quickly became clear that there was something much more serious going on with Crystal. Crystal had been screaming loudly in the kitchen, causing Sarah to fear that her mother was being attacked. The bedroom door had been slightly open, but the kitchen was out of sight. Stiff with fear, Sarah could not move or make a sound. As she listened, she heard footsteps approaching, making her think that the next attacker would come for her. Feeling scared, she quickly hid behind the bed. However, the footsteps stopped, and Sarah heard the sound of a kitchen drawer opening, followed by the clatter of someone rummaging through utensils. Crystal's screams continued, filled with pleas for mercy, until she was stabbed. With each stab, Crystal's voice grew weaker. Sarah realized she could do nothing and would likely be killed as well. After her mother's screams stopped, she left the room and went into the kitchen, where she witnessed a terrible scene. Her mother lay in a large pool of blood covering the floor. Confused, Sarah asked her neighbors for help and eventually found an Italian restaurant whose owner lived in an adjacent building. They opened the door for Sarah and called 911 to report the incident. The officers immediately went to their home. Upon arrival, officers witnessed a gruesome scene. The kitchen was covered in blood, including the floors, walls, and kitchen appliances. Crystal had died, and medical experts determined that Crystal had lost too much blood. Police found a handprint on the front door glass, possibly Sarah's. No other fingerprints were found, but there were many bloody shoe prints on the kitchen floor. Investigators took photos to determine the shoe size and model, assuming they belonged to the killer. A trail of blood led to Sarah's bedroom but suddenly stopped as if the killer had changed his mind. One particular detail caught the detective's attention. The killer had tried to wipe away some blood on the floor. With the blood stains spreading, this effort seemed futile. Further investigation revealed that some of the drops of blood on the floor were irregularly shaped, suggesting they had fallen from the knife. This led investigators to believe that drops of blood might have flown out of the knife during the attack. Investigations showed that, in addition to the initial drops of blood, other drops of blood on the floor appeared to have fallen at a 90-degree angle, suggesting they originated from a higher point. Detectives suspected these drops might belong to the perpetrator, who might have been injured during the crime. Further supporting this theory, the trail of blood drops led directly to a roll of tissue. This showed that the perpetrator used a tissue to stop the bleeding before hastily leaving the scene. Autopsy results showed that Crystal's body had suffered more than 50 stab wounds. The murder weapon, possibly a kitchen knife, was not found at the crime scene, suggesting the perpetrator might have brought it with him. An important detail revealed that the force used was so great that part of the knife broke and was stuck in Crystal's body. The investigation also found evidence of a previous sexual assault. As a result, medical experts were able to collect and analyze the perpetrator's semen along with the blood samples obtained, sending both for further laboratory testing. However, there was a problem. The local DNA laboratory was severely understaffed due to funding problems, leading to a significant backlog. As a result, detectives had to begin the investigation without forensic evidence, which would take at least 6 months to process. The investigation began by ruling out robbery as a motive because nothing was missing from the house. Furthermore, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police suspected that the victim had arbitrarily opened the door to let the perpetrator in. Since she was wearing pajamas, it was unlikely that she was expecting visitors. Detectives came up with 2 theories. Either the victim knew her killer, or someone she didn't know knocked on her door and convinced her to let them in under false pretenses. To pursue this lead, detectives turned their attention to the only witness, Sarah, who was undergoing a medical examination at the hospital. The police began questioning Sarah about the killer, and she explained that she had stayed in the bedroom until the incident was over. However, the police were a bit skeptical about her story. They asked her how she knew her mother had been attacked with a knife, and Sarah replied that it was obvious. Despite her reaction, detectives continued to pressure her, suspecting that she might have been withholding information and might have seen the perpetrator. During the first 3 days after the murder, police questioned Sarah 18 times in the hope that her story would change. However, she always maintained that everything happened as she initially described. Meanwhile, detectives pursued other leads and achieved their first breakthrough. They discovered a pair of boots at a local shoe store whose sole pattern resembled bloody footprints found at the crime scene. Additionally, they learned that Crystal had been harassed by Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend. Despite evidence that the killer was a man, the police decided to investigate Teresa, considering her history of threatening to kill Crystal. Maybe Teresa had found an accomplice to commit the crime. However, detectives found no evidence to support this theory. Further investigation revealed that Crystal was in a relationship with a man named Dennis at the time of her death. The two had met 2 years ago when Dennis started working at the shoe store. Dennis and Crystal began dating, and Dennis eventually proposed to her. Although Crystal accepted, they never married. Their relationship was tense, with frequent arguments and Dennis engaging in aggressive behavior, such as breaking objects and banging on walls. However, there was no evidence that he ever physically harmed Crystal. The day after Crystal's murder, detectives visited Dennis at his home. When they asked if he had left the house the night before or if he had seen Crystal, Dennis immediately asked if she was dead and then fainted. After regaining consciousness, he answered the detective's questions. Dennis explained that he had planned to visit Crystal that evening but was delayed because he was helping a friend fix his car. When he later called Crystal, she said it was too late, leading to an argument and Dennis staying home. Police were able to verify Dennis' alibi, confirming that he had helped his friend that evening. Dennis also agreed to take a polygraph test, which showed no signs of deception, except when asked if he felt responsible for Crystal's death. He replied no, but the test detected his tremors. Additionally, detectives discovered that Dennis had the same shoe size as the killer, but no matching shoes were found in his house. Dennis agreed to provide a DNA sample but made a special request. Dennis had made a special request to the detectives. If they decided to arrest him, he had asked them to enter his workplace through the back door, instead of the main entrance. He had explained that he did not want to disrupt the work environment or make noise in front of his colleagues because his boss had always treated him kindly. However, because he had continued to claim innocence, this request had raised suspicions. The police investigation had led to another important discovery. They had contacted Crystal's best friend, who lived in another town, and she had revealed that Crystal had confided in her just weeks before the murder. Crystal had expressed her fear towards Dennis, saying their arguments had escalated and had become more and more heated. Dennis' behavior had also become more and more aggressive, causing Crystal to consider ending their relationship. However, she had hesitated to do so because she was afraid of his reaction. Detectives had also interviewed one of Crystal's co-workers, but she had not provided any useful information during their conversation. However, as soon as the police had left, Dennis had gone to the person's workplace and had begun asking about her conversation with the detectives. The police investigation had continued despite the lack of evidence against the initial suspect, as DNA test results would have taken several months to process. Meanwhile, they had pursued other leads. A strange tip had led them to a local man named Donnie, who had allegedly bragged about killing Crystal while drunk at a party. However, when questioned, Donnie had claimed to have no memory of the party and had denied any involvement in the murder. The police investigation into Crystal's murder had had difficulty finding any concrete clues. In an effort to uncover new information, Crystal's family had offered a $10,000 reward and had distributed flyers around town. However, Teresa, Crystal's ex-husband's girlfriend, had been seen repeatedly tearing up these flyers, raising suspicions. The ex-husband, Tom, had been thoroughly investigated but had eventually been ruled out as a suspect due to his severe alcoholism. His heavy daily drinking had made it unlikely he would commit a crime, and he had had no clear motive. Police had also investigated two other men Crystal had dated after her divorce, but had found no evidence linking them to the crime. All three men, including Tom, had provided DNA samples to be sent to a laboratory for analysis. 9 months after the murder, the lab results had finally come in, but they hadn't matched any of the suspects, including Dennis. This had left detectives with no new leads. They had asked to take Dennis's DNA sample again for further testing, but the results had still been the same. The investigation into Crystal's murder had hit a dead end, causing detectives to reinvestigate their only witness, Sarah. They had suspected that Sarah might be hiding information or that a traumatic experience had caused her to repress memories of the killer. To question her further, police had gone to Texas, where Sarah was living with her aunt. A polygraph test had been administered to Sarah, but the results hadn't shown any deception. Despite this, investigators had continued to question her for days, asking the same questions over and over again. However, Sarah had always maintained that she had not seen the killer. The case had remained unsolved for several years. Police had continued to interview potential suspects and follow up on leads. But to no avail. The breakthrough had come in the late 1990s with the introduction of the FBI's DNA database. Investigators had uploaded the killer's DNA sample, but unfortunately, no matches had been found. The detective asked Sarah to work with a psychologist to try to recall any repressed memories of the crime. Even though Sarah agreed, the psychologist ultimately concluded that she really didn't remember anything and was telling the truth about not seeing the killer. The case remained unsolved for many years. Detectives continued to investigate but found no new leads. This changed in 2006 when a surprising development occurred. A DNA sample was entered into the FBI database and it matched blood and semen left at the crime scene where Crystal was killed. The DNA belonged to a man named Michael Hutchinson, who was never suspected in the case. Detectives discovered that in 2003, Hutchinson was arrested for assault and threatening with a weapon, resulting in a sentence of 6 months in prison and 3 years of probation. During his arrest, a DNA sample was collected, but it was not uploaded to the FBI database at the time. It was instead stored in a laboratory. 3 years after the initial DNA sample was taken, Michael was arrested for drunk driving with his children. He was released on bail but failed to appear in court, leading to jail time. Ironically, Michael was arrested on the day of the wedding and put in a prison cell. His DNA sample was retrieved and quickly uploaded to the database. The detective contacted Sarah, informing her of the development, but asked her to keep the information confidential until formal charges were filed. When asked if she knew the suspect, Sarah replied that she did not. Given that Michael was already in custody, the detective carefully built the case to prevent any possibility of him evading punishment. Further investigation revealed that at the time of the murder, Michael lived in Bridgeton, just 2 miles from Crystal's residence. When he was 19, Michael lived near the Italian restaurant where Sarah called the police. He regularly drove to his mother's house, which was just a short distance from Crystal's, meaning he often passed by her residence. The detective discovered that Michael could have easily encountered Crystal multiple times before the murder. When questioned in prison, Michael insisted he was not involved in Crystal's murder and denied knowing her, despite the presence of his semen and blood on her body at the crime scene. The detective found his denial unconvincing. During the visit to the prison, the detective observed a noticeable scar on Michael's palm. This was very significant because it was likely that Crystal's killer injured his hand during the crime. While this alone would not have been enough evidence in court, combined with DNA evidence, it contributed to Michael's eventual murder charge. According to the prosecution, Michael, an illegal drug user, saw Crystal as he passed her house on the night of the murder. He decided to assault her, leading to her death. While Michael refused to confess, the available evidence clearly showed that he was responsible for the assault and murder of Crystal. During the trial, an explanation was found for the murderer's lack of fingerprints at the crime scene. It turned out that Michael's job as a bricklayer was the reason. Over time, the constant wear and tear on his hands had erased the patterns on his palms, making it impossible for him to leave fingerprints. Michael presented testimony about his timeline to defend himself. He claimed he had met Crystal at a bar and they had returned to her place to have consensual sex. However, his story became suspicious when he described a strange man wearing a black motorcycle jacket breaking into the house, knocking him unconscious, and killing Crystal. When Michael regained consciousness, he allegedly tried to fight off the attacker but had injured his hand. The attacker then fled, and Michael also left the crime scene without a reasonable explanation. Michael's story was very unconvincing. The investigation revealed that the only shoe prints at the scene had belonged to Michael. If his story was true, the intruder would have had to take off his shoes before entering the house, which still wouldn't have explained the lack of other marks on the floor. Furthermore, no witnesses had come forward to confirm that Crystal had been at the bar with Michael. The trial ended on April 9, 2007, with Michael being unanimously found guilty. As a result, He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole and remained incarcerated. Sarah's life was deeply affected by her mother's death, but she found the strength to move forward with time. She pursued further education, became a writer, and wrote a book about her mother's murder.